Welcome. It is Monday Night Live YouTube. It is God's comic, Brad Stine, and this is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Tonight's special guest from WallBuilders, Tim Barton. He's going to show us how the Constitution has fallen to pieces, and all of the congressmen and senators have run a flea and taken their money and their stocks with them, while they're making the rest of us eat bugs and die in the sun so that we can all just die a horrible death, but at least they'll be okay. Why? That's the key to be a good politician. Make sure you get everything you can out of it and forget your constituency. They can go eat bugs for all I care. Why? If you don't know and your first time here, this is God's comic, Brad Stine. Then you might have shown up because of that, but my son's here, Wyatt Leroy Stine. He issued from my loins. He's a man that I created from whole cloth, and he is my sidekick. He's my producer, my director, and my ballet instructor. Wyatt, how you doing? How's your plie?
Your form is terrible.
Well, son, I have asked you get mirrors so I can adjust, because you know all the professional ballet studios have mirrors so you can see yourself.
Yeah, I know. That's why you don't have them. Professionals use them.
What do you think is the hardest part of dance when you first started picking it up when you were young and you were being bullied and you didn't care? You're going to dance anyways, and wearing those little shoes that those little in the tutu. I mean, it was embarrassing, but you didn't care because you wanted to be a dancer.
Yes, it was a difficult youth. It was not the easiest, but I struggled, and I take that struggle and I use it to reflect my art.
Yeah.
You know, they say all the greatest artists suffer, right?
I hope, yeah.
So I figured if I'm gonna be a good artist, I have to suffer more than anyone.
Okay.
And boy, let me tell you, it ain't worth it.
Listen, you suffered because you went into a field you loved and yet you sucked at, and that is hard to overcome.
What better suffering is there than utter failure at one's dreams?
No, I'm with you. I'm with you 100% on that. Well, folks, if you are brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, you should know a few things about this podcast. It's brilliant. But it's very boutique. It's not for everybody. We don't want this to go out to the unwashed masses, to all the Philistines out there. We don't want millions watching. That's what everybody does, right? That's the Joe Rogan model. That's the Daily Wire model. Hey, let's get lots of viewers. Not us. We want to keep it to a very small, unique subset of people that show up every Monday because they literally feel sorry for it.
Yeah. There are many reasons. Again, you know what?
No. What?
Maybe this is their way of suffering for their hearts.
Could be.
Maybe.
I mean, listen, I would say, and I might even mention them eventually. It still hasn't shown up on my iPad.
What do you mean as sort of a new iPod?
Well, it hasn't, but here's the thing. It's okay because we've learned that sometimes it takes me a long time. Now, keep in mind, folks, and if you're new to the podcast, you need to know this. My son set this up and put it on this page. I haven't touched it. So this is the one he promised it would show up to his old man. And, of course, it still hasn't. And, again, I think it's a big ruse. I have a feeling you guys talk throughout the week about what can we do to make this all crumble around Brad. And I think it's, I feel sorry for my son. I want to give him more money to help him get better and get equipped and get some Google training. Nothing works. It's just a pure fiasco. But who am I to...
And you're on the Brad Stine Has Issues YouTube page, right?
I guess. I don't know.
It should say that.
Brad Stine Has Issues podcast. Yeah, it does,
so
I guess.
Where is it then? It should
home.
Be there.
Should I go on home? Should I go on subscriptions?
I don't know.
Should I go on, see how it just has the old last week's episode twice, and it still has, nothing.
Why? Do you want me to fix that?
Well,
again,
for those of you who are brand new,
all you have to do is wait a few minutes.
You're going to watch the disembodied hand of Wyatt Leroy Stine. Now, here's the other thing about you guys who are brand new. Wyatt never is going to be...
charging for this service.
You really should. Now, folks, I want you to see, I haven't touched it, just so you can see that I've done nothing wrong, nothing bad, nothing weird. I've done nothing. He's now scrolling. It's not working for him. He's doing something. So why didn't you put me there in the first place?
You know what I had to do?
No?
Refresh the page.
Why didn't you keep it fresh? The last thing I want from my page is to go stale, to go rotten, to go stinky. Have you ever had rotten milk?
No.
Oh,
Have you?
Yeah.
Why would you drink rotten milk?
Well, it was an accident. You know, you don't know
How
it's
do you
rotten.
accidentally drink rotten milk? It both looks, sounds, and smells horrible.
When it first starts going sideways, it doesn't always like just burst out like when you open it. Sometimes you just kind of and you're doing and you do a thing. It's just starting to turn, but it's nasty. It's nasty, son. Hey, listen, for those of you who are asking, and I'm sure you are, why the getup? Brad, you going for that Jeremiah Johnson look, which I told you guys in a previous episode was one of my favorite top 10 movies, Jeremiah Johnson. Did you ever see Jeremiah Johnson?
Never seen that movie. No, what's it about?
Well, it's about a mountain man, a guy that wants to leave civilization in the mid-1800s after the war, and he goes to go up into the mountains and learn how to trap and to create ways to keep warm during the winter with heating rocks and putting rugs down of things you've captured and hides you've tanned, and learn how to, and then eventually he gets a wife from a tribe and a son from a pioneer family that were killed by Indians, and the son is mute, but he takes him on, and he's going off to help out these people on a hunt, and it come to find out there's these guys that want to help get these soldiers back to their fort, and so they ask him, will you help us get back? And he's like, look, I can. And then they come to this Indian graveyard and say, we got to go around. It's not safe. You can't go through it.
Oh, wait, no, I know this movie now. You've shown me it.
It's a great movie.
It's a great movie, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, they kill his wife and his son, and so he ends up attacking all of these Indians for a long period of time and kills them until they eventually give up. And it's actually based on the life of Liver Eaton Johnson, who this actually happened to.
Yeah. I'm sorry. What's his name again?
Liver Eaton Johnson.
Okay.
Yeah, that should give you a little bit of...
let me get this straight. A bunch of Indians were like, we should have beef with someone. Let's see. Who do we have? Wimpy Steve.
Right.
Okay, we can go for Lackluster Larry.
Right.
How about liver eating Steve? At that point, you should just... Everybody should just kick you out of the tribe because you're trying to get them all killed.
Yeah, well, anyways.
Who messes with someone whose nickname is Liver Eater?
Well, they did, and they lost a lot of livers. They lost a lot of livers.
How does that scenario end well for you, honestly?
It doesn't. Have you ever had liver?
I think I have.
Yeah.
It's a delicacy, though. I don't have that often.
It's not the greatest. Now, have you ever heard of foie gras?
Is that French for liver?
Yeah, that's the duck liver where they force feed
it. So
it's rough. Oh,
is it?
But that's the French.
Is it? I mean, the French eat snails. You know, is liver really that like?
I think liver is not a big stretch at this point, except for the duck's liver, which is stretched apparently to bursting. Because
isn't it like 10 times the?
I guess I don't even want to think about a bursted liver at this point. Wyatt, I'm just grateful to finally be able to look at myself.
So if your liver bursts, does that make it a deadle? Because you probably die if that happens.
Oh, comatose, maybe, if it's still hanging on.
Well, yeah. So, like, is it technically a different organ, though? Or is it the same one that's broken?
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. I've never gone into a lot of liver.
Hey, anyone in our audience who's a medical expert, help us out here. Is the liver named that because it lets you live? Or is it just happens to only be found in living people?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe.
Come on, anyone know the answer to this? I'm curious.
I don't know. I mean, this question couldn't be any worse at this point.
What are you talking about?
Well, liverwurst.
Just move on to the next thing.
Listen, I know what you people are thinking. Why the getup? Why the gruff? Why the brickles? Why are you looking scraggly? Why are you looking, I'm guessing, for a sponsor with straight razors? Or wouldn't you? Have you ever done a straight razor shave, son?
No.
Yeah, me neither. I'm going to do that.
Actually, no. I did at that one barber place, didn't I?
Did they do straight razor?
Yeah, with hot oil. It's...
Did they put the
towel?
Hot towel?
Yeah, the towel, yeah.
I've never done that.
I don't want to do it. You know, there's actually a barbershop somewhere who's famous for doing straight razor shaving while balancing on a ball.
No.
That's a thing. Who in their right mind would ever be like, yes, I want more danger with my shaving?
I know who.
Except, of course, there's only one man I can think of who'd be into that.
I know who it is.
Liver eating.
Johnson. Listen, I want you guys to understand that I am going to be filming a brand new movie coming up. Well, it's going to be a while till you'll see it, but it's going to be filming, I think, starting September 25th. And so I have begun to grow out this beard because by the time we start, he's going to be an older gentleman. And so what's interesting about my beard white, and this is my real hair. I don't know if you people have ever seen it up close. And if you have, that's weird and creepy. So back off. But this is my hair, and it's blonde, and I don't have a shred of gray in my hair, but my beard goes bonkers gray. I think, isn't that a color at Lowe's, bonkers gray?
Yeah, it's right next to why'd you pick this purple?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Well, anyways, bonkers gray. So it does that. So what I'm going to do is we'll probably get this cut to a certain style. I want to keep it longer, and then I will probably have it dyed with gray streaks so that it will all match, and I'll look like an elder fellow. And that's what I have to play in this particular movie. More will be forthcoming. You guys will hear about it. You're going to hear when it's going to air. Who knows? Maybe we'll have a big giant Nashville production. You guys can come all out and see it if you choose to make that trek. By that point, perhaps the 100th episode will have aired, and we will have revealed Wyatt for once and for all, so you can be on the program, and we'll have a little video of him so you guys can see us interact. You guys thought it was a good idea. I asked you. Remember, most people just do what they want to do because it's their show. Not me. I asked you guys because you show up every Monday. I figured you guys have as much invested in the stinking thing as I have. So anyways, that's what's going on with the Get Up. And I was thinking today, son, about where technology is kind of a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, for one thing, technology has reached a place where we don't use, for example, double-edged swords.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, we've got guns. We've got projectiles, missiles.
Is a gun like I know
plastic
it's technology.
Explosives.
I know that a gun and stuff like that is technology, but is that what most people think of when they think of technology?
Well, no, but here's what I was getting at. I said it's a double-edged sword, and then I realized, well, a sword is kind of an archaic weapon. I mean, I don't know the last time you heard somebody killed.
Listen, it may be archaic, but that doesn't mean I want to see someone charging at me with one.
No, I mean, it's dangerous. It works. Hey, listen,
it's as lethal now as it was back then.
I didn't say it wasn't effective. I just said that we no longer use swords because we figured out a way to kill somebody at 100 yards while reclining and having a beer.
You're right. It was called the bow and arrow, and then that became the trebuchet, and I guess at some point the gun was invented.
Yeah, and that was not quite as accurate back then. They didn't.
Oh no, it was a smooth bore, round musket balls.
They didn't.
But
it wasn't,
I mean, it could
rattle.
punch through solid plate mail like it was nothing. So
yeah, because that plate metal was like a tin foil.
It was some aluminum foil cosplay or something.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyways, that couldn't have been very. I sent you when I was in Germany. I visited a castle. They had tons of armor, or was it? Or maybe it was in Prague.
I remember, that.
It was in Prague, so it was in former Czechoslovakia. Which, by the way, I'm playing in this movie a puppet maker. Giving you some clues. Who's from Czechoslovakia? And I've actually been...
Johnson?
No, it's not liver eating. He's long gone.
I mean, what do you think he does with the livers when he's done?
Yeah,
he makes puppets out of them.
Well, who knows? Who knows? That'd be like.
And then he sells it to the French for us gourmet meals.
That's right. They can play with their food, literally,
without the kids getting in trouble. Yeah, brilliant.
So, anyways, I'm going to be doing that. But I was there, and I actually sent you a bunch of armor from that period just because I thought you'd find it interesting. They had a lot of swords and it's very elegant and quite immaculate, but it doesn't look super strong. It's not like it's half an inch thick or something because they have to have it way to where you can wear it and be able to move around. So, anyways, it worked, I guess, but nevertheless, it didn't look like it. It still feels like you could punch through it with a sword. I think. I don't know. Maybe they. Anyways, here's what I was getting at. Technology is a double-edged sword, and here's what I mean by that. Years ago, if you were out in the woods and it was going to get cold, you didn't have matches, so you had to find a way to start a fire without a match. Now you could do it with a stick and a string and some and another sort of a piece of wood with an indention, and you'd have some little kindling in there. We've all seen this. You got a rock on top, you're going back and forth, and it's just creating friction, and it will ignite apparently. And it sounds really hard to do. I've never done it, Wyatt, but nevertheless, if you didn't learn how to do it, you died. And so you're thinking, well, we've got technology now. We can have a lighter with us or matches or whatever. So that's good, right? We've moved on. But here's the thing, why? Once you have lost the old knowledge, if something went down, for example, the world's coming to an end. I don't know if were you aware of that? The world's coming to the end.
The world is coming to an end at some point, whether it be us nuking ourselves,
or
an asteroid hits us,
or
we create a black hole and destroy everything,
or
we create a supernova and destroy everything,
or
we just decide, let's just blast ourselves off to space, I guess.
Well,
we'll find something.
Or just demons destroy everything and God says, I'm done.
Or the sun explodes. That's a good one.
Wow, that'd be rough.
Or
listen, if the sun exploded, let's say right now,
yep,
we wouldn't just we wouldn't see it for a while, right?
8 minutes. Yep.
What?
8 minutes. That's how long it would take for us to see that the sun is gone.
Oh, and yet with the sun not being there, how would we see it?
Well,
it'd be dark.
No, it wouldn't. Not for 8 minutes.
Okay.
It takes 8 minutes for light from the sun to hit the earth.
Okay.
Which means the light that is currently being used to illuminate the planet is light that has existed for 8 minutes.
Okay.
Which means
it was 8 minutes ago that it was created through a thermonuclear explosion.
And I think the same thing works for gravity too. So like the Earth would still I think be in its orbit for 8 minutes too.
Well, what does gravity have to do with the sun?
Well, simple. The whole reason why the Earth doesn't careen out into space is because the sun's gravity anchors it.
Oh, the sun's gravity.
But the gravity isn't instantaneous. It has a speed of light delay.
Oh.
So it will also last for 8 minutes after the Earth explodes. The sun explodes.
Well, I'm trying to wonder if there's any more information that you could throw out there to make people even more willing to flee and find a different channel to watch.
The moon is fake.
Okay. Well, the moon's not fake. It's landing on it is what people are questioning.
No, I've heard people say the moon is fake,
and
I envy them. I wish I could be that oblivious to life.
Moon envy. Well, listen, you need to understand something. So here's what I was just thinking about. So you're 28 years old, am I right?
Don't mind me.
No, it's okay, son.
And
you've got aspirations to become something great and famous. And by the way, by October, you will be what?
A game program guy.
You will be.
I guess
finally have your what is a bachelor? What do they call it?
Bachelor's of programming science.
Which is perfectly appropriate because you're a bachelor.
Don't mind me.
And you're going to remain that way because you don't
have game
or are interested in.
No, literally, it's just I don't have game. That's literally the only reason.
Dating.
Yeah, I can't date to save my life.
Why?
Every attempt has failed.
Why?
A myriad of reasons.
A myriad gives us a lot to choose from. So tell me one.
Fine. First one didn't reciprocate. Second one couldn't date. Third one was I already had a boyfriend. And I haven't found anyone since then that I don't know.
That would reciprocate.
Yeah.
So you asked a girl, and the first time she's like, no, I'm not into you. And
No.
you're like, oh, that hurts.
Mhm.
And then the next one liked you, but she wasn't allowed to date because she was younger than you.
But
Something. That was the bowling.
Yeah, the bowling girl.
And then somebody else, something happened. Who's
She already had a boyfriend.
Oh, that's right. Was that the girl at Lowe's?
No, that was School of Rock.
Oh, School of Rock.
Yep.
And then there was a Lowe's girl that you liked, and you started chatting her up, and next thing you know, she quit.
Yeah, she got catcalled by a bunch of hooligan high schoolers and decided it wasn't safe.
Wow. And then one more after that?
Maybe? I don't know.
Well,
you know I can't remember things that happened in my life.
True. Well, that probably is why you've had so much problems. You've had all these girls that said yes, and you forgot.
There's just a line outside the house every day, and I always wonder what they're there for.
What are you doing there?
What are you here for?
Well, anyways, you don't have game. That's true. And not everybody does. I never had game. Do you know my first date? I was 18 years old. My second semester of high school, senior year, I was about out before I ever had a date.
No.
Yeah. So I didn't know what I was doing. So I made up for lost time. I will say that. Dated a whole bunch, a whole ton after that when I started learning how. But it is it's tough because women have all the power. They get to say no. Hey, you want to go? No, I don't. Hey, you want to go? I've got a boyfriend. Oh, I'm not allowed. They just make crap up. Anyways, I don't know how we got off in your pathetic dating life, but what I was trying to get at too was the idea of technology, because I was thinking about this. Why, for people that out there that don't know, Wyatt hates to drive. Now he's a 28-year-old man. He can drive. He's got his own car, but he hates to drive. That's why I made him drive in New York once, just because I just wanted him to. Yeah, he was not happy.
Never again.
And so, but I wanted him to know he had the experience. Plus, I took him on the subway, so he had that experience. And we went down to Wall Street, and we were on Eric Metaxas's radio show. You remember that, Wyatt?
Yeah, I remember that.
And remember we got lost trying to find it? We were in the rain.
It was like, it took us like half an hour to find that place. It was ridiculous.
Wasn't it? Why didn't we take a cab?
I don't know.
Well, anyways, so
I didn't. You're the guy who knows New York more than I do. Why didn't we take a cab?
I know. I don't remember now. I think because we thought we were there. Anyways, but here's the deal. If you drive somewhere, so here's the thing about Wyatt. Wyatt works at a church, is one of his myriad side hustles, because the dude's doing what he can to save up his dough so that one day if a girl ever says yes to his date, he'll be able to afford to take her somewhere. But he goes on Wednesday nights to his church in Gladeville, Tennessee, and they rehearse, and then on Sundays he goes there. To this day, and he's done it for at least 10 years, he uses his GPS. 10 years, and he's not sure how to get there without his GPS. Am I right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Now, is that just for cover, or do you literally go, I don't know if I'll remember.
I really don't remember.
Oh, come on.
It took me 6 months of driving to the same place every single day, 5 days a week, to remember the route.
Okay, well, anyways.
Yeah.
If GPS vanished tomorrow and you were somewhere, you don't know how to read a map.
I can read a map,
No, you
old
can't.
man.
How do you know?
Because I studied it in school, and I remembered that. Plus, it's a map. It ain't that hard to figure out.
You sure?
Yes.
We had Thomas Brother maps. They were actually, they would have these grids, and you could go find where you did, and they gave you which number and A3, and you could. Anyways, we literally had to create it and write it down. And okay, so you go to the 405, and you go south, and you get off on Euclid, and then you go east. And I mean, we had to do it that way. You don't know how to change a tire. You guys grew up with run flats. So if you had to change a tire, you'd be dead. Wolves would eat you and laugh doing it, eating your liver, going.
I think you're thinking of hyenas.
Yeah, maybe.
And I would be totally fine. I'll just walk.
You're in the Mojave Desert.
Why am I driving?
That's what I'm saying. Why are you out there not knowing how to?
I mean, first of all, I hate driving. Second of all, I wait, what? There's no logic in this.
You went to
Yeah, go on, justify this now. Come on.
You went to Joshua Tree. That's the desert.
Okay, yeah, but that's a desert like that has well laid out paths, and it's also not in a different country.
Well, how about changing your oil?
Easy.
How?
You just go to the Toyota dealership.
Yeah, that's my point.
Well, no.
My point is, I used to have to unscrew the oil filter and let it pour out, and then you put on a new filter, and then you had a little cranky
and
thing,
guess what?
And you poured in new oil.
And guess what happened?
What?
It got easier.
It got easier.
And you
my
can't
point
let go
is,
of the fact that the skill that you had to learn to survive is now a complete optional thing. We don't need to know how to do that anymore.
If
you're not special because you know how to do this archaic thing.
If the grid collapses,
if the grid collapses, getting your car to run is the least of your worries.
What did I?
How are we going to get food? How are we going to get water? How are we going to store the food?
You know what I would need?
Food's going to perish. The refrigerator ain't running. How are we going to keep it cool? What you going to do? Stove doesn't work. You can't heat anything up. You're dead. Your car can wait.
So you're saying the oil change won't be the first thing on your mind?
Probably not. No,
Okay.
no, probably not.
Maybe find some liver to eat. Listen, Wyatt, what did I do with my glasses? Are there glasses anywhere?
How on earth should I know?
If the apocalypse hits and that was my glasses, I won't be able to read the instructions on how to take the cyanide pill.
Glasses. He left them somewhere in the
Do you see him anywhere? Run downstairs.
Did you actually leave them?
I don't know. Run downstairs to my office and get my glasses, and I will try to keep the people occupied.
Entertainment people would pay money to see this.
I'm going to try to keep the people occupied while you go find my glasses. Oh, there they are. Woo! I got nervous, son. I'm going to say, here comes the hand.
Why should I get you though?
What?
Do I get a raise for this?
No, you don't get a raise.
Oh, well, you know what? I think he's got the right glasses then. I might need to get another pill.
You know, folks, no son I know of would treat their father that way, especially one like me who has, problems. Okay, guess what? Ashley Haas.
I believe you have issues, good sir.
Greeting, Brad, Wyatt, and everyone. Happy Labor Day. Could you imagine if you were having your child today and you went into labor?
Is today Labor Day?
Ashley Haas just said, I've never seen. Is she new?
Who's Ashley Haas? Labor Day police?
I think she's a Labor Day aficionado. Some people are into Labor Day. Some people become experts on Labor Day.
Is today Labor Day?
It is.
I didn't know that.
Would Ashley Haas come out and give us a full Labor Day
I believe
greeting?
Ashley Haas knows what she's talking about.
Jim Bronow's here. Hey, buddy. I'm just some guy. You know who that is. Saint Nicholas. Lance Kirkman, may Jesus bless you. He does, in spite of myself. Paul Fay Marie Rountree, greetings, fellow laborers. And, of course, she is my favorite four-named lady. Dusty, I guess he's here. Joyful Note showed up. I'm glad to see that. Oh, it's Cindy Haas. Now I know who she is. Cindy Haas is connected to Ashley, or as we like to call her, Ashley Haas, in that she's her mother. Aaron Oakes here for the highlight of my Mondays. Poor Aaron Oakes. Gianna Sizemore, hi Bede, and hi Brad. I don't know who Bede is, but I'm glad that she's reaching out to him. I'm sure he doesn't get a lot of correspondence. Carrie Tudor's here. We made another Monday, Brad and White and all the peeps. Let me see. Forrest Bainey, S4 and no more. Hey, listen, Forrest Bainey is named with the what? Best name there ever was. Let's see. Anybody else out there that I haven't seen? Okay, so Gianna Sarzan did want to let you know the liver is a filter for the body. And let's see. Somebody wanted to know, are straight razors still a thing? The answer is yes. You don't want them curved. Trust me. Let's see. Another Pinocchio remake starring Brad Son. I'd watch it. Well, you know, it's funny you should say that because it is a puppet maker and I'm playing a puppet maker, but it's not Pinocchio. But you're about to find out. I'll tell you more about it. And I think what I'm going to do, Wyatt, is I'm going to take some behind the scenes of me shooting the film and send it so that we can run it through. But how are we going to do it? Well, you might have to come down Can we run the podcast remotely?
As long as I've got an internet connection, technically, yeah.
Holy smoke, is that what we're going to do? How would we do this part, the live part, though?
Carefully.
Okay.
And at great expense.
All right, let's see. Ashley Haas says, bow. You have game. What? What does that mean? You have game, Wyatt. Why do you have game? Oh, we were talking about when you don't have game.
Yes.
When you're going out with
I
gas.
don't have game, but people think I have game,
Well,
but I
she
don't have
said
game.
you did, and I don't know if she would know because she just believes in you, I guess. Greg Smith, a little late, but I finally made it. Hello to everyone. Hey, Greg Smith. Paul Lesjak, I learned how to change the tarot at 15, and I'm a girl. Oh, Paula Lesjak. That helps. I'm glad she said that, but I didn't see it at first. If we all switch to cursive, switch to stick shift, and switch to an analog clock, we could bring the nation to a halt. You know, he's absolutely 100% right. Wyatt, we're getting towards the end of this, what we like to call our...
Witty Banter?
Yes, Witty Banter. But I can't leave people with Witty Banter without...
Yes, you can.
Well, I could, but I think I want to...
Nothing's stopping you. We can end this podcast right now. I get the button right in front of me. What's stopping me?
Tim Barton has things to say. Folks, you're going to love this interview with Tim Barton. This guy is going to give you all the truth and the insights about America. They are experts on the Constitution, on the history of the United States, our Christian heritage. With WallBuilders, if you've never gone to WallBuilders, you need to. They will give you more information than you've ever known. And, you know, it doesn't matter if our country collapses and it becomes totalitarian. It won't matter what our history was. It's gone. But you might want to hang on to it while the getting's good. But I did want to mention something, you know, because as you know, this is comedy, and we've kind of done that. We muddled through it. Conservatism, this is my perspective, and Christianity colliding in a cacophony of clarity. So I'd like to give you a little moment of Christianity, if you don't mind. A little story. It's poignant, but maybe it'll be of some help to you. So on this Labor Day, you know, it's a holiday, and it always has its poignancy. Maybe you think of times in your life or people in your life whenever there's a holiday. My dad died when he was 59 years old. He had brain cancer. So it was a miserable death and a terrible thing to happen. But it happens to people, whether you like it or not, and you can't do a dang thing about it. But I remember many years ago, I was at the carnival. Now, for those of you who don't know, I have a family in the carnival and have been carnies since the 60s. So I was with them and have worked this summer in the carnival. And that's just part of getting your wings as a Stine, is you got to go do a season with the carnival. But I was in a carnival with my dad and my two younger brothers. And they wanted to go in the haunted house. Now, this is a carnival haunted house, White, so it's really cheesy. And this is in the 70s, so even cheesier still. So you'd walk through and it'd be kind of dark, and then maybe a skeleton would pop up, and you'd get like 2 or 3 scares, and you'd come out the other side, and it was stupid. But I was young, and maybe 12, maybe 13, and my younger brothers were much younger. So my dad got us 3 tickets to go into the scary carnival walk-through haunted house. And he said, I don't want to go. Here you go. He didn't want to spend 50 cents or what it was to do this stupid thing. He said, you go in. So I go in, and my 2 brothers are behind me, and off we go. And I get in there, and it's dark, and it's black, and I just started getting really scared. Like this, I don't want to do this. I'm scared. I didn't think I would be, but I was. So I come out, and I said to my dad, they won't do it. They need you to go. It was a lie. I wanted him to come because I was scared, but I couldn't say that. They said, yeah, they can't, they need you. And he said, oh, we had to spend 50 cents, which was a lot of money back in those days. I'm at that point in my life, son, where I can say that was a lot of money back in those days, even if it was like, a quarter. Anyways.
Oh, how I wish we had that nowadays.
I know it. Can you imagine? But, so my dad got in front, and we start walking through it, and he was there, so I could kind of be in tight. I felt safe because he went first. He was there first. Whatever thing was going to reach out, he will see it, he will experience it, but I'll be okay. I'll be behind him. He'll got me say. And And I think maybe there was a stupid, I don't even remember, little dumb skeleton, dumb, something else, who knows, dumb thing. You're out. I'm going, I could have done. But I was scared and we made it through. But the point was, he went first. I was scared. I didn't want to do it. I didn't know how to get them in, but he went first, so it was okay. It was safe. He went there to make sure it was okay to make the path straight and safe, and we got through it. So when he was dying, you're dealing with that because you lose a loved one. It's rough, and especially the first time you lose your parents. I mean, that's rough. And someday soon I'll be gone, son, and you'll be running this podcast alone. You'll still be there. You'll be running the show, but unfortunately, this will be blank, and it's going to be really boring, especially with the banter. Trust me, there'll be nothing to bounce it off of. But nevertheless, I'll leave this empire to you. But as he was dying, I'm thinking, what is this? Where is he going? What is this all about? Because as a Christ follower, I do believe there in the hereafter. I do know that there is something more than this. Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead. He proved he was God, so we can actually have this confidence that the supernatural's out there. It's something that's very rare to see. Certainly, miracles are rare. God does them every now and again to show it's true, but it's not something you see very often. But he dies, and I remember going to the funeral, and I thought, my entire life, whenever I went to things like this, funerals or whatever, family, my dad was always with me. And this time, I'm alone because he's the one that died. And I was weird, and it was hard, and it was painful. And I'm like, but my turn's coming. You really, as you get older, realize you really are going to one day be the guy that they put up the in memoriam of with a headstone or whatever, or ashes. It's going to be your turn. It's going to be your turn. And I remember thinking, you know what, though? I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know what I'm going to experience, but you went first. You went ahead of me to make sure it was safe and it was okay. And I think that's really what this whole life is. We don't know what's going to happen to America. We don't know if it's going to survive. Not the freedom. It will always be here, of course, as a country. But we don't know if it will be a totalitarian country. That could be. Of course, if Kamala Harris wins, she's a communist. So they will certainly do what they can to implement using the legal forces to imprison people. I mean, this is just we've seen it happen. It's nothing I'm coming up with some hyperbole or some crazy talk. It's what they've already done since Obama was using the IRS to target Americans. We all found that none of these people were punished. And so they continue to do that because why wouldn't you? If there's no punishment, you can get away with it, go for it. But I'm going to die and it's going to be okay. And so in the meantime, I'm going to try to stand up for my faith first. It is the single most important thing that if God does not intervene for this nation, then we will simply be a destroyed nation. And there's been many over the years. But I'm going to be there someday, and I'm going to enter into that space. And then if I go and you're still around, son, you'll say, well, he went first. He went ahead. He wanted to see how it was and make sure it was okay. And that's where I want to see you someday. Maybe we can have a little podcast there. You can stay in your mansion. I'll have mine. But this is the key, folks. I hope you have somebody that went first. That you loved. It's painful, but to know that they are out there sort of paving the way for you, waiting for you. It's worth it. It's good. God is real. If you don't know him and you're trying to find purpose and meaning in life, that's what it is. It is not on this earth. This earth can have great things, and you should be grateful for it. God made it and invented it for our pleasure, but it's fallen, it's broken. And he wants you to know that there's something even better than this. This is just a taste of something that's beyond what you can imagine. But if we're going to have a chance to do it freely and have religious liberties and truly try to pass this on so that my son and his sons, if he ever has one, if he ever gets a date, have freedom. That's what I'm shooting for. And one way you can do that is to fight, to pray, to join the mighty 10,000. If you haven't, go to bradstine.com, join it right now. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Subscribe, share, get everybody to jump in. We're growing. Believe it or not, we're growing. They mainly watch afterwards, not live like you guys do, but you're my most loyal people. And so I'm so grateful that you're here. But I want you to jump in, enjoy this incredible interview because this is someone giving us ammunition. It's part of what it means to be the militia of the mind. How can you outthink these people? What is your rights? What does it mean to be American? We got to remember what got us here, not where we're going, because we're going sideways, folks. And you can only do that by going back to the integrity, the virtue, and the power of the original intent of the Constitution and the founding fathers that created this great nation. It is the greatest nation in human history. It may not survive, but we can try to help it do that. And we can do that by educating ourselves, not with the propaganda that has destroyed our nation's schools, but with the remembrance of the truth of what got us here in the first place. So that being said, I'm so grateful you showed up. I'm grateful that you got to have a little fun with us and maybe a little poignancy. But now, get your little notebooks out, set up a chair, whatever beverage you drink, jump in, talk to each other. But I promise you, this is going to be a very important and informative interview. So please join me, God's comic Brad Stine, and our guests tonight from WallBuilders, Tim Barton. Tim Barton, how do you do? Timothy.
Hey, Brad, good to be with you.
Well, I'm grateful that you would take some time to be with me because, well, we got a lot to talk about. And, you know, you and I have crossed paths numerous times, usually with Rick Green and Patriot Academy and something to that effect, but also just in other areas and other arenas. And like I said in my intro, your dad's book, Original Intent, was really eye-opening to me. I got to be honest, Tim, if you aren't intentional about educating yourself about what it means to be American, what it means to be free, what it means to have religious liberties. What does the Constitution teach you? If you don't, by volition, seek to understand these things, you're not going to know what's being stolen from you, what's being manipulated, what is being used against you.
Yeah.
That there is no rights to it. And that is what the Constitution's purpose is not just to sort of create some rights out of whole cloth. We believe that they're natural and came from God, but to establish them. This is what the rules are, so that if you're an American, it goes like this. So let's kind of, before we kind of get into all the nuances of the conspiracy theories and all the atheists that hate Christianity and think it belongs nowhere in America, let's kind of start with a very basic premise. The Constitution of the United States of America. If you were to define, Tim, what that means, what is the Constitution? What is its definition? What is it?
Well, I would say it's the operation for a nation. And to really give context to it, I would say that you have to go back to the Declaration of Independence. The founding fathers themselves, they even explained and argued that you can't understand the Constitution if you don't first understand the Declaration. The Declaration is what lays out the philosophy of government, where the founding fathers clearly identified that there is a divine creator and he created us with inalienable rights, and government exists to secure those rights. That was the philosophy of government. And then the Constitution was the order of operation. It was, how are we going to do this? And they believed we have to have checks and balances, and there have to be limitations to this. And it should be we, the people, that are in charge. So they began laying out the operations for a nation, but it was built on the philosophy, knowing that our rights don't come from the government. They don't come from a king. They don't come from some tyrant. Our rights come from God. And the reason it does matter is there's some people that look at the Constitution and they see the Constitution entirely as a secular document, which it's not. But you especially can't think it's secular if you understand the foundation the Constitution was built on. The Constitution was built on the Declaration. The Declaration is explicitly religious in acknowledging that there is a God, there's a divine creator. In fact, they concluded the Declaration with a firm reliance on divine providence, knowing without God's help, we're never going to pull this off. This was the founding fathers' idea, but the Constitution is the framework by which we operate. It puts the power and control in we, the people. It separates power. There's checks and balances, because the founding fathers knew that people left to themselves are generally going to be selfish and seek their own end. And so there has to be checks and balances. And there's not only checks and balances from a kind of horizontal level where you have three different branches of government. There was even checks and balances in federalism from a north and south level, where you have the federal government, but then you have state governments and you have local governments, and each one had different responsibilities and different jurisdictions that they couldn't overlap or they couldn't take away from each other in certain areas. And so there's a lot more to this, but ultimately it's about giving freedom and power and control to we the people.
That is what a republic is. It's the rule of the people. It's not a pure democracy because that's mob rule.
Mhm.
But there is a democratic element to it in that the people get to vote. There is this sort of sense of a majority rules, so to speak. But even there, they were intriguingly wise enough to create an electoral college that in
Yeah.
some ways allowed the democratic process without in fact giving all the power to the majority. We're going to expose it all. So just get ready to we're going to boot camp, baby, and you're going to start shooting and firing. So I really want to just get a lot of info on this because my people are proactive. They don't want to just listen to things they already agree with, but see, how can I put this in action and change things if it's even possible? Let's start with this idea of federalism. That was one thing, one of the big things that was causing strife when they were trying to get the Constitution put into place and ratified. There was this Federalist and anti-Federalist. Now, to me, a Federalist, if you just use the term, sounds like, oh, you mean you're pro-federal government, you're give all the power to the federal government, and the anti-Federalist doesn't. And so there can sometimes be a misunderstanding of the terms. So can we start with that? What is a Federalist and an anti-Federalist?
Yeah, so even the idea of federalism, Brad, you're exactly right. Where people hear federalism, they're like, well, that's the federal government. Well, federalism really is identifying the different levels of jurisdiction from the layers of government, where you have your national government, you have your state governments and your local governments. And federalism recognizes there's different responsibilities and jurisdictions within that. Now, going back to the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, the Federalists were the ones who were saying we need a government strong enough to do things. And the Anti-Federalists were like, but if you give them power to do things, they might abuse your rights. However, nobody disagreed that there needed to be more power in the federal government than there had been, because before the U.S. Constitution, there was the Articles of Confederation. Now, when we separate from Great Britain in 1776, the Articles of Confederation were drafted in 1777. It wasn't ratified until 1781. But in essence, the entire American Revolution, we were operating under the understanding of the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation, it gave Congress the power to say anything they wanted, but it gave them no means to enforce. So there's no enforcement mechanism. So along those lines, there were times when the U.S. military were like, we're not getting the supplies and the funds and things we need. Well, Congress didn't have the power to tax. They have no money to come in. And this is where many founding fathers themselves, especially early on, they took out loans in their own name against their own homes, their own businesses, and they were helping fund the local militias from the states where they were, because there was no money in the federal government. Why? Because the government didn't have the power to tax. This was part of the problems under the Articles of Confederation. It gave the government power to say things, but not the power to do things. And as they went on through the course of the revolution, there were many other problems as well, where any changes to the Articles of Confederation had to be completely unanimous. And if you imagine in Congress today, if things had to be unanimous in the House and the Senate, there's 435 members of the House, there's 100 members in the Senate. If it had to be unanimous, nothing would ever be, they wouldn't even agree that we see the sun coming up in the east and going down in the west, because they would say, well, the sun doesn't come up, the earth rotates. Like, there's these dumb arguments we would have. Nothing would ever get done. That's part of what they recognized. And so when they go to write the Constitution, they write it in such a way to give more power to a federal government. But then you had those that became known as the Anti-Federalists. And George Mason was one of the leaders of the Anti-Federalist movement. More specifically, he was a leader of what became known as the Bill of Rights. He said, as great as some of what we're doing is, we shouldn't give the government power without first really making sure we've clarified that there's explicit limitations. And if you go and read the Federalist Papers or the Anti-Federalist Papers, after the Constitution was written, it was sent to the 13 colonies to be ratified. And the Federalist Papers specifically were written for the people of New York. As New York was debating, should we ratify this or not? That's when you had James Madison, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton. They began writing letters. They were printed in newspapers, and later they became known as the Federalist Papers. But they were arguing in favor of the Constitution, saying, guys, this will do so much of what we wanted. And they actually argued, we should never fear the federal government usurping and taking power, because they only have the power that is explicitly outlined in the Constitution. And so there's these enumerated powers, and there's essentially 17 enumerated powers. Most of them are in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, giving power to the Congress. But they said they can only do these specific outlying things in the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists took the opposite approach. They said, now we know the Constitution says the government can only do these specific things that are listed, but we know that if we don't tell them very specifically, there's certain things you can never do and never touch, and certain places you can never go. We know that there's going to be people that abuse that power, that go too far. So this was the debate. And the Anti-Federalists, there were some of them that finally acquiesced and said, okay, we will agree and we will vote to have the Constitution ratified, but only if we agree to do a Bill of Rights. So the Anti-Federalists largely should be credited with having the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. The Federalists should be the ones credited with having the Constitution done in the first place. But looking back to what it was, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, everybody agreed that the federal government should only do and only be allowed to do the things explicitly outlined and given to them according to the Constitution. Now, we have come way beyond that. I mean, so far in a different direction from what the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists intended. But the Federalists were people that argued for a stronger federal government, and the Anti-Federalists argued that there had to be specific and extreme limitations put on that federal government, or because they knew the nature of man, because the founding fathers believed in this old doctrine known as the depravity of man, the fallen sinful nature of man. They said, look, we know people are basically sinful, and we know people left to their own contrivances are going to do sinful, evil, wicked things. So we need to have these checks and balances set up. We need to have these limitations put in place so that if the federal government ever comes and says, hey, you can't be religious, you don't have the freedom of speech, you don't have the right of self-defense, that we will have something explicitly written saying that's incorrect. Like, it's literally part of the Constitution saying the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Like, we need to make this so obvious that no idiot can misrepresent this. That was the position. Now, that's obviously that's a much larger explanation of the Federalists, Anti-Federalists, but it's adding context to help understand part of where they come from and even part of what they were trying to accomplish. No Federalists, Anti-Federalists, nobody disagreed that the federal government could only do the explicit things outlined in the Constitution. Anything not outlined in the Constitution, this is part of where it goes to the 9th and 10th Amendment. The 9th Amendment says there are rights that belong to the people that are more than what's explicitly outlined in the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were known as a negative listing of rights. It was listing things the federal government can never infringe upon. And the 9th Amendment says, by the way, there's way more rights that the people have than just what we've outlined. We just outlined some of the really important ones that we want to make sure that nobody ever confuses. Well, the 10th Amendment says that any right not explicitly given to the federal government in the Constitution belongs to the states. And this is part of where federalism, that word, comes in. It's states' rights versus federal government rights. And so if it's not outlined in the Constitution, it belongs to the states. Well, if you start looking today at what the federal government is doing and go read the Constitution, the majority of what the federal government does, it is not authorized to be doing. Virtually every single agency and department that is in existence today under the federal government, it's not authorized according to the Constitution. And this is not me being anti-American government or anti necessarily these agencies. It's recognizing the wrong entity is controlling them. Those should be issues like, for example, the Department of Education. That first of all, didn't exist until 1979. So this is like a brand new entity when it comes to the realm of an American agency or an American department. Before 1979, how was education controlled? It was controlled in states because that's what everybody recognized. The Constitution doesn't say anything about education. Therefore, who does education belong to? It belongs to the states. This is a states issue, and states, historically, it was always controlled at the local level. Why? Because it's the local agencies. It's a local mom and dad, the local school board. They know what their kids are dealing with in their local schools. So they should be the ones determining what's best for our kids in this level, not some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., who's never been to our town, who's never been to one of our school board meetings, who's not been to our school district, doesn't know what our kids are dealing with. they understood that states are far more equipped to control local issues than is the federal government. Well, that's part of the 10th Amendment. Anything not explicitly given to the federal government belongs to the states. And again, that's where the word federalism comes from. What's a state's issue versus a federal issue, but also that's part of what the anti-federalists versus the federalists. And again, none of them would have agreed with what it's become today. All of them agreed that the federal government should only do what's explicitly outlined in the Constitution. But this is part of where the anti-federalists were like, well, we better write this down, because one day there's going to be these morons who are in office who don't understand what the Constitution says, and we want to make sure they can never violate these things. Well, today, they're violating the basic things in the Bill of Rights because most Americans don't even know what's in the Bill of Rights. And when we don't know what's in the Constitution, when we don't know what's in the Bill of Rights, then we don't recognize when those rights are being violated. We don't recognize when the Constitution is being violated, and therefore we don't know. We should be standing up saying, hey, you can't do this, or even the beginning, like known as the preamble, but the beginning of the Constitution, that we, the people, we're the ones in charge. The elected officials, they work for us. Well, if we're the boss, that means we can fire them. Right. And most elected officials today, they think that they're the all wise, all knowing superiors, when in fact is, no, you work for me. I'm your boss. And frankly, I'm not happy with most of the performance I'm seeing from you. And I think most of you need to be fired because you're not showing yourself to be competent in upholding and following the Constitution.
Obviously, summary and a very, very, complicated of Americana, because, when you got bureaucrats, when you have politicians, when you have more and more people involved, more groups involved, it gets muddier, it gets more bureaucratic, it gets more red tapey, it gets more difficult, it gets more challenging. You mentioned about, hey, there's going to be people that are going to eventually want to perhaps supplant the constitutional rights that they've been given. Most of that is because they don't like it. They don't want what it says. And so this is a despotic move. This is a control move. It is ironic, if not obvious, that progressive leftism, which of course its foundation is in Marxism, is totalitarian. It has to be. Nobody is persuaded to become an entity in the state system, and you're nobody. You just work for the state, and you're just this sort of peon. Nobody can be persuaded of that, because that goes against human nature, let alone free thinking people. So it has to be done by the edge of a sword, right? And so they want to impose these things upon us, and they do it not with usually a bayonet in the US, but with carrots of welfare and free phones and free this and free that, and suddenly you become lazy and you became dependent on things that people want to give you, so that you will give your sacred vote to them, because it is sacred. You are part of the republic. It's yours. And when you vote for somebody, you're not voting for somebody that's smarter than you, supposedly, or somebody that has a superior role in America. You're giving their vote to take to Congress to make your vote for you.
Right.
They're being a conduit for your point of view. And supposedly when they campaign, they tell you what they believe. If you agree with it, you're all in sync. We all agree that we both see the world this way. So thank you for representing me when you go there. And of course, that's not what's happened. And it's why I've always said that I find, frankly, Tim, the Republicans more despicable in the last number of years, because the Democrats have made it very clear what they believe, and it's very left-leaning. It's incredibly postmodern, secularistic, hedonistic, evil. Butcher a baby at any stage of their development, including after they were born, mutilate children's genitals, bring people into this country that are not melting and becoming part of the fabric of our nation, which is the only way that something can work. Emphasize multiculturalism as opposed to e pluribus unum. Obviously, multiculturalism doesn't make any sense, because the house divided falls if we want to use the biblical mandate. But by the same token, multiculturalism is trying to give equal access to all cultures as though they were equal. If that were true, why would people be leaving their culture to come to ours?
Right.
If it was as good or worse. Sub-Saharan Africans that have chosen to immigrate to the United States than were ever brought in slavery, if they were coming to a racist nation, then you must think very little of them to think they're so stupid that they're leaving utopia to come to a slave system. So something is amiss.
Yeah.
Something is wrong in the messaging. Something is not accurate in the way we are being communicated to in America as to who we are and our founding. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to kind of deal with the Federalists and Anti-Federalists first. It sounds like a dry, boring topic, but it's important because we need to understand, how is this thing supposed to work? And what did
Yeah.
the founders think was the only way this machine can move into place? Is it's put together in a specific way, and that's how it's going to function. So Federalists, in sort of summation, were not anti-states' rights. They just, I guess, wanted to make sure that the federal government had some oversight
Right.
over all of the states, so we had some kind of way for us to have continuity moving forward as a nation, because we all have these different points of view, but we have to have some things in common just so we can function. Is that an accurate summary?
It is. And Brad, I'd love to add too, as you were commenting, it's really interesting if you back up historically, when progressives, the early 1900s, when they start being the leaders of the nation, so to speak, right? Woodrow Wilson, hero of the progressives, and progressive take over education and so many things they do. Well, one of the things it's really fascinating, there was no high school in America prior to the 1920s. School used to only go to 8th level. And back then it wasn't even grades, right? It was levels, because you had to show content mastery at this level to go to the next level. Progressives took over and said, let's make it grades. And every year, let's do it by age, not by content mastery. And then let's add 4 more years onto it. Well, then even for universities, this is when they added the PhD program. And we were following something that happened over in Europe. In Europe, they had just introduced this new PhD program. And the reason they did it, they said, we need to have experts that can coach us and guide us through what we need to know. And so having a PhD program, now we can train up and we can raise experts, and the experts, they'll be the ones to tell us what to do, how to do it, what to think about certain topics and issues. And that way we don't have to know everything. We just trust the experts. Well, in the midst of bringing in experts, not only do you need to bring in this notion that you're teaching people now that some people are really smart and some people are dumb, and we need the smart people to tell the dumb people what to do. They're introducing this idea. Well, it goes further, because in progressive education, part of what the argument was, when you go back to the early 1900s, in 1903, the Rockefeller family, they decide that they need to find a tax shelter more or less for their money, but they start an educational foundation. And the first year, Mr. Rockefeller puts $1 million in. By 1907, he's put $43 million in. And that's $43 million in 1907. That's $1.5 billion in today's money. And their goal was to transform education. And part of the argument, the guy who actually ran the Educational Foundation, he gave a speech where he said, we don't need better thinkers. We don't need more philosophers and more poets. And he goes through this long list of what we don't need. He then concludes, instead, we need better workers in the factory. Well, what does that mean? This is part of the second industrial revolution, where you have the assembly line, right? You have the Model T. And so you need people on the assembly line who are just going to screw that nut and bolt together, who are going to take orders and do what they're told. So we need people that will listen, that will memorize what we're telling them, that will repeat and perform based on what they're told. And this is what's introduced in education. And so in education, they introduced concepts for the very first time. They introduced multiple choice, true, false, and fill in the blank. And all of those are requiring you to think through, what did the teacher tell me? And then repeat what the teacher told you. So no longer are we teaching people to think. Now, the reason I'm saying this, I want to connect the dots, is because right now you have over 60% of Americans that can't even identify the 3 branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial. Well, if we don't even know the 3 branches, we for sure don't know what the role of those 3 branches are. We now in education, we don't even teach civics anymore, which is how government actually operates, how bills become law. I mean, we do in some schools have government classes, but it's the macro of government. And it's why government is good and why we need government, because government solves all of our problems. It's propaganda. It's not actually teaching the Constitution and how it works. And again, why this matters is because we're teaching students to memorize and repeat what they're told. We're not teaching them how the process works. We're not reading the Constitution, and we're telling them that there are experts and you need to trust the experts. And so now we're teaching kids that our congressmen, they're the experts, right? The heads of departments, they're the experts. Even our doctors, right? During COVID, they're the experts. So whatever they tell you, trust the experts, even if they contradict themselves from like 2 weeks earlier, where you don't need a mask and now you need a mask, and like all of the nonsense we heard, trust the experts. Well, this is the problem now we're seeing with our nation, even when it comes to having a constitution, is we have people who have not been told that you are competent to read and study and understand the Constitution. We're told, no, you don't need to read. That's old and that's hard. And that's why we have experts. You don't need to read and know this. Just trust the experts. And so the experts are telling us, right, well, capitalism is bad and socialism is good. But to your point, when we have these people coming from all over the world, we're being told in America that we're one of the most uniquely racist nations in the world. And yet, like 90% of the people coming to our nation have brown and black skin. Well, if we're this incredibly racist nation, why do they want to be here? Because they know something we are not telling our kids.
Yeah.
That we're not this uniquely racist nation, that actually capitalism, it doesn't increase poverty. It increases the opportunity for you to actually improve your standard of living, for you to actually grow your wealth, for you to accomplish and achieve more and have a better foundation than people in virtually any other nation anywhere else in the world. But backing up, because we've been living the last 100 years under this progressive model of education where we're not teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to think. Yeah. We're teaching them to memorize and repeat. It's the reason we are in the mess we are in, because, and I'm saying this because you said, right, we should be independent thinkers, but we're teaching kids not to be independent thinkers. Yeah. We're teaching them to trust the experts. And now we're telling them that if someone, right, says that capitalism is good, well, it's because they hate people. If someone says that, right, unborn babies are actually human beings, it's because they hate women. Yeah. We're programming kids to actually hate the other side. We're programming kids to actually to do violence against people that have a different opinion than what the progressive left has, because they understand that if we actually had a intellectual conversation with the freedom of ideas and the free exchange of ideas, they know that their ideas don't actually hold up. Yeah. And so they're encouraging opposition and cancel and yelling down and right, these riots against, they're encouraging that because they understand the failure of their ideas. But this is what Marx promoted, right? Where even Karl Marx said that if you have an uneducated, this kind of base level, because Karl Marx said there's only two really positions of people. Either you're oppressed or you're the oppressor. Yeah. But Karl Marx argued that some people don't know they're oppressed. So you need to teach them they're oppressed, and then you need to instigate them to rise up against their oppressors, to overthrow the structures of power. That's what we're seeing right now. That we are teaching kids they're oppressed, when in fact, they're not oppressed by the things they're being told they're oppressed from. Yeah. It's just they're not hearing both sides of the story. They're hearing one opinion and they're buying into that lie.
I sometimes conflate my Marxists. So I don't know. I don't remember if it was Derrida or Marcuse, but one of them wrote a book, I think it was Marcuse, but anyways, about the idea of being intolerant to those who are intolerant. In other words, they began this sort of process of saying, no, intolerance is only good when you tolerate what we believe. Right. And they give themselves sort of a virtue point that they've self-appointed themselves. We already have decided we're the good guys. We have all the right answers. We all see things with the moral clarity that nobody else does. So thus, if we decide to punch a Nazi, well, who wouldn't want to punch a Nazi? And of course, what they don't define is, well, A, you're the one that called him a Nazi without proof. So let's start there. Let's make sure, first off, what if you just decided you don't like a guy, so you just label him to give yourself the right to eliminate them without having to prove your point? Well, why don't you have to prove your point? Because your point, first off, is stupid, it's cancerous, it's evil, it's subhuman, but you can't. You can't dialogue because you don't have the goods. So the only way you can make this stick is propaganda and forcing the other side out of the equation. So there's nothing to fight against this sort of bulldozer of one idea. Unfortunately, Woodrow Wilson, so forth, were educated in Germany. So much of this crap, like usual, comes from Germany.
Yep.
The Frankfurt School came from Germany. They ended up
Exactly.
in Columbia University because they were Jewish. Many of them, they had to flee Nazi Germany, ironically, to come here to teach their crazy Marxism to a free nation. And then with Paul Freire, who taught the idea of we are not here to teach, but that the teacher and the student are equal, and we are here to make activists. And that's where I read in The Marxification of Education by James Lindsay about that idea of why the way that we teach our kids now is to make them activists, not to make them educated.
Right.
So this is really what it is legitimately, Tim, a civil war. We have been infiltrated from within. It's the long march through the institutions, and they are winning by a long shot because they control all the dissemination of information. They have all of there's no longer a press here in the United States. They control all of the bells and whistles. In other words, the entertainment industry, the sports industry. So everything where you could possibly find some objectivity has been co-opted by a particular point of view that is very specific and anti-American, Adam Freedom. Well, listen, that's sort of the modern, up-to-date, where we are now, part of America that we need to discuss. So let's start with the Founding Fathers. Number one, how many were there? All I hear is Jefferson, Washington, Adams, Madison. There was 4. How many actual founding? What qualifies a founding father?
There were 56 men that signed the Declaration. There were 39 that signed the Constitution, but there were 55 that were part of the Constitutional Convention at some point. Some didn't sign it because they wanted there to be a Bill of Rights. And of those 55 that framed the Constitution, there were 6 that signed it. That was an overlap from 6 that signed the Declaration of Independence. But after the Constitution, you then have the first Congress who actually does the Bill of Rights. There's 90 members of the first Congress. And so you would consider the guys that did the Declaration, that did the Constitution, and that did the Bill of Rights, all of them have to be considered founding fathers. So that's approximately 200. Well, then we haven't even gotten into like the Patrick Henrys, right? We haven't even gotten into some of the significant military generals or leaders or early governors. So I would say there's probably at least 250 that you could safely argue were founding fathers.
And that would mean that a founding father would mean theoretically that you were there sort of at the origins of the United States as we know it, and had influence perhaps in describing what this country is going to look like, maybe in your writings, maybe in your dialogues, maybe in your debates. I mean, how would they establish their status as a founder?
And this is where there can be some level of subjectivity, but ultimately what people would argue is someone that had a significant influence on America becoming America, right? Well, the Declaration of Independence, significant, America becoming America. Constitution, significant. Bill of Rights, significant. So that's why those guys, all of them easily fall into that category because they were significant contributors. Again, a guy like a Patrick Henry, his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, that was in a speech he gave in Virginia when the British were already making military aggressive moves in America. But Virginia was trying to decide, most of that was up in like Massachusetts. Are we really going to join in? Patrick Henry is one of the leaders who helps lead the militia of Virginia, which actually helps lead Virginia away from the king. So they separate, and then he's the one that helps them get involved in the first place. So even though he didn't sign one of the major documents, he is the one who's the major leader, goes on to become the governor of Virginia as all of this unfolds. So there's guys like that again, usually you're looking at major contributors that had a significant role in helping America become the nation of America. So again, there's a little bit of nuance and subjectivity as to who you argue, or some people might say, well, I think this general was. Somebody else might say, well, he wasn't that important. So you can argue it a little bit, but there's not really argued. There's at least 200 up to approximately maybe 250 that would be considered founding fathers in the grand scheme of things, that most people aren't going to argue against their inclusion in that kind of title of founding father.
Now, would some of the so did they somehow have an even more robust influence? Is it because they were also a president, so that gave them more awareness of their status? Or were there a handful that really were the linchpins for most of everything else that happened?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely were some that were far more involved and influential in various areas. So certainly, a George Washington, a John Adams, a Thomas Jefferson, a James Madison, a Benjamin Franklin. But then there's lesser known names that were absolutely as significant, like a John Witherspoon, who was the president of, at that time, was a college from New Jersey. It ended up becoming Princeton University. So for the sake of people to remember, he was the president of Princeton. He is responsible, while he was there, he was recruited to come to America from Scotland. He was a Presbyterian minister in Scotland. At that time, every university had to have a pastor as a president, because every university was founded by denominations to train kids from their denomination in the gospel ministry, among other things. And so Princeton was a Presbyterian university. He was recruited to come from Scotland. Well, while he was there, he ends up being there for many years. He personally trained more founding fathers than any other single person or than any other single university. And so this guy's resume of who he personally mentored is one of the most astounding resumes there is. There's also other guys like Benjamin Rush. When John Adams died in 1826, Benjamin Rush had died in 1813. When Benjamin Rush died in 1813, John Adams said that Benjamin Rush was one of the most three notable founding fathers. So of all the founding fathers that we could know and identify, John Adams says he's one of the three most significant. He said the most important was George Washington, which that's probably obvious for a lot of us. Second most was Benjamin Franklin. Again, that's a super noted, well-known name. He said, but third was Benjamin Rush. Today, most Americans have never heard of Benjamin Rush, but Benjamin Rush signed the Declaration. He helped ratify the Constitution. Benjamin Rush also served on three different presidential administrations. He was very connected in the founding era. He's also the one who helped start the very first abolition society in America. It was the Abolition Society of Pennsylvania in 1774. He's also the one that started the Sunday school movement in America. He started one of the first Bible societies in America. He's considered the most significant doctor in American history. He came up with medical cures over 200 years ago that we are still using today. He was the first doctor to discover that smoking would cause lung cancer, that chewing tobacco caused mouth cancer. He discovered that all the way back in the 1700s. I mean, the guy was one of the most remarkable men there was. He was one of the most known by the founding fathers during the American Revolution. He was the Surgeon General over the doctor over all of the military appointed by George Washington. And again, like his resume just goes on and on and on, which is why John Adams says he's one of the most noted. Well, today we don't know that name, but part of the reason that we know some of the names we know today is because, for example, some of them did become presidents. And so then their political career continued in the spotlight long enough that we go, oh, okay, that guy was super important because look at the spotlight that was on him. Well, a guy like James Madison, for example, today he's known as the father of the Constitution. And that's kind of fair, but it's also kind of inaccurate because James Madison, when he kept the most extensive notes and records from the Constitutional Convention. That's true. He was there virtually every single day. He was very involved, except he's not the guy that wrote the Constitution. The guy that wrote the Constitution is Gouverneur Morris. Well, who is Gouverneur Morris? Well, Gouverneur Morris was actually chosen to be on every single committee during the Constitutional Convention. So he was a part of every single meeting. And when it came time to put all of the ideas together, and the founding fathers said, well, who's the guy that should write it? They didn't choose James Madison. Now, again, here's kind of what's interesting. James Madison was a very outspoken voice. In fact, he came up with a lot of significant ideas in the Constitution. But of all of the ideas he came up with, it was like 70% of his ideas, the other founding fathers voted against.
We're going to do a few more on the founders. I just want to establish a couple sort of maybe urban legends, myths, or whatever about them, and get your thoughts. Okay, one of the things that's so absolutely essential for atheists to bring up is that the founders weren't Christians. They were deists. Now, certainly we know there was some of that element of that season in culture in West, that the Enlightenment and whatnot had brought a lot of the ideas of deism, perhaps as a worthy philosophy to aggregate to if you wanted to believe sort of in a supernatural realm or there is some sort of providence out there. But he's not really listening to our prayers. He kind of winds the clock and off he goes. And that's been placed upon the founders. What I've heard a lot from the left is, teach the history, the true history of America, which means their point of view, their propagandist perspective. But nevertheless, let's pretend they actually mean that. If the founding fathers were deists, they did not believe that in the Christian tradition, the theologic, historical tradition, that Jesus Christ was God incarnate, died and rose from the dead. And they do believe that there was a supernatural element, a providential element. They mentioned that, even Franklin, who was supposedly the most secular, but at least he said, hey, let's not forget we should be praying right now because things are getting rough. So they had this sense that there is a transcendent force that we can't abandon during this time. That was very much part of the milieu of the 1700s. It was God. There was this idea that there was something more important than us. And that gave them the substance to say, we find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. So they did sense that there has to be something beyond the secular realm if this is going to work, because if God created the laws, then they can't just be changed when a despot gets into power. So that way they were wise enough for that.
In the modern era, when someone makes the claim, they make it in an accusatory form and they say, well, prove me wrong. Well, that's actually not how that works. If you're going to make a claim, the burden of proof is on the person making the claim, right? The impetus is on you to defend that position. And so just along this line, I spoke a couple years ago at a university, and at the end that we were doing Q&A, and there was a professor that came up and he said, okay, Tim, you're arguing that, the founding fathers were these really moral, Bible-based people, but we know, right, that they were all these atheists and agnostics and deists. And I said, oh, okay, well, let's talk about it for a second. Who were all these atheists, agnostics, and deists? And he's like, well, I mean, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, Washington, and he's only saying the names of the ones he knows, right? Which he's not correct, and I know what's happening, but I also know we're playing a game. And I like games. I'm pretty good at some games, and especially when it's a dumb game about American history, I'm pretty good at that game.
Yeah.
So I said, well, who else? And he says, well, I mean, I think all of the others. And I'm like, well, John Witherspoon was actually a pastor, like a signer of the Declaration, but he was a pastor at the time he signed. I mean, I don't think he's an atheist. Well, I mean, maybe not John Witherspoon. Oh, okay. Benjamin Rush founds the first Bible Society and actually encourages everybody. He's known as the father of public schools under the Constitution. And the first essays he writes as we become a nation, encouraging every state to follow certain standards. His first essay in 1791 is called The Bible in Schools, where he encourages the most important book that every kid should read is the Bible. So they'll learn about Jesus. And that doesn't sound like an atheist. And so I just start going through examples. And he's like, well, I mean, I don't know about them, and I haven't heard of them. And right. The point is, you haven't heard about any of these people, and you're making these claims and accusations, and we're repeating in the modern era, we repeat these narratives. And we've heard it long enough. When you hear a lie long enough,
Goebbels,
right? Yeah, I mean, if you just get your 7th booster, then you can't get COVID. That's all you need to know, right? That's the important thing. Well, okay, you tell me that as much as you want, but I'm going to need to see some data, right? Let's see if we can verify this. And for us, we always say, well, let's go back to the original source, because for us, we focus on original history. And if you go back, for example, there were 56 men that signed the Declaration. Of those 56, there's only one that ever self-identified as anything other than a Christian, and it was Benjamin Franklin. Now, Benjamin Franklin actually self-identified as a deist. It was in his autobiography, but this is where I always pause people, and I'm like, have you ever read his autobiography? Because I have. And we have his original autobiography, the first printing of it, and I have a couple sticky notes in it. I have this book with me, and I want to show people to make this point. I'm like, okay, but you can find it online. Go to Google Books, do a search in his book, and look for the term deist. And it's on 2 pages. What you will find is that he says, when I was 15 years old, I was reading these debates between a group of deists and a group of Christian pastors. And as I was reading the debates, it occurred to me that the deists were actually making better arguments than the pastors were. So I determined that the only logical conclusion is I should then be a deist, because they make the most sense. Continue on. It's like a paragraph and a half later. He says, but upon further consideration, I realized that although the deists might have been correct in some of their arguments and assessments, that the belief itself as a whole would be of no use to me and of no real benefit to anyone else. So I quickly left that belief behind. So the only founding father that ever self-identified as a deist, he said it was when he was 15 years old. And then upon further consideration, he quickly left that belief behind. So what? He's a deist for like a week and a half, maybe, but he's not a deist for very long. Now, caveat, it didn't mean he's a Christian, because 3 months before he dies, Franklin, he got an honorary degree from Yale University. Franklin was a elementary school dropout. There's so many fun thoughts and jokes about that, right? Like, what an idiot. Only one of the greatest scientists in America drops out of elementary school. But back then we were teaching kids how to learn and how to think and how to grow. And so once you get some basic ideas, man, just start reading, become a learner. You can achieve a lot. Franklin did. Franklin gets an honorary degree from Yale University. At that time, the president of Yale University was Ezra Stiles. Ezra Stiles is a pastor. He wrote Franklin and said, Franklin, we're going to honor you. We would like to have a portrait to put up on display. And we're going to do this whole thing to really celebrate your life and legacy. And, you're one of our alumni because we gave you this honorary degree. And Ezra Stiles asked, do you have a portrait? Would you be willing to send it to us that we could put it up on display? He said, I'm sure in your lifetime you've sat for many portraits. Could we have one of them? He then has a postscript in this letter. And this is 3 months before Franklin dies. In this postscript, he says, I have one more question. And I mean no offense by asking this. I'm curious, where do you stand on the position of Jesus? Because I wish all men that were as I am, that they know Jesus as not only a savior, but as their friend, where I believe he's truly divine. He's the Son of God. He came to earth and paid the penalty for our sin. And he goes through like the theology of Jesus. He says, I'm just curious, where do you stand on the position of Jesus? He says, but I mean no offense by this question. And if this question bothers you, just ignore it. Pretend like I didn't ask it because I don't want to offend you. We've been friends for way too long. Franklin writes a letter back. This letter is a month before Franklin dies. And Franklin says, I have many paintings. I've sat for so many. He says, but I don't like any of them. I don't want to send you any of these paintings because in all my paintings, I look old and fat. And I don't want the kids to remember me as an old fat man, which I think is just hilarious, right? About Franklin's hubris at this point. Because you're like, bro, you are an old fat man. Like that's the shoe that fits. That's what it is. He then answers the postscript. He says, now, in regards to your question about Jesus, he said, I find no offense by it. He says, but the question, if I believe he's truly divine, is he truly the Son of God? He said, it's a question that should not be answered lightly. And really, someone should do the proper research before they answer. Franklin says, I've never done the research. I don't know if he truly is divine or if he's just the greatest moral teacher that God sent to us that we would learn a better way to live. I don't know if he's a teacher or if he truly is divine. He says, but I can tell you my belief system. And this is Franklin's letter. Now, Franklin wrote this in more than one place, but this is an easy place to go find because this is a month before he dies. And he says, this is what I believe my whole life. He says, I believe there is one God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. I believe that he rewards the good. He punishes the wicked, both in this life and in the life to come. And that he's given us the Old and New Testament as the code and standard for which we should conduct ourselves so that we could live a life pleasing to him, that one day we will be rewarded in eternity for the deeds we have done while here on this earth. But in regard to Jesus, I'm not sure if he's truly divine or not. Now, the reason that's significant is, I think lots of connections we can make. To say that Franklin is not an atheist, agnostic, and deist is not necessarily to say he's a Christian, because I don't think he was a Christian. Now, I think it's also possible in that last month that the Holy Spirit's like, look up Jesus real quick, right? Investigate him. I think it's totally possible that in the last month of Franklin's life, he does investigate. And I mean, internally, I hope he does, because Franklin was such a remarkable man and such an incredible contributor as a founding father. But Franklin was not an atheist, agnostic, or deist. He's a little closer to maybe one of our Orthodox Jewish friends who believes in God, who believed in praying to God, that God answers prayers, that God's given us a standard of right and wrong, and that God rewards and punishes. And I'm just not sure if Jesus is divine. And I bring that up because today, a lot of the founding fathers are accused of things that if you just read their writings, they are clearly not what they're accused of. For example, George Washington is another guy. A lot of people say, well, he was a deist because he talked about like providence and blah, blah, blah. If you go back and read the writings, of everyone who ever wrote about the faith of George Washington, everyone said he's a Christian. In fact, Jared Sparks is the one who did the first collection of the writings of George Washington. The first writing, the collector said it was 12-volume set. Jared Schroeder took from that what was called the Maxims of Washington in 1855. He took the most pithy statements and letters from that, all those hundreds of letters of Washington, and he broke them up into 4 sections. And one of those 4 sections was the religious writings or quotes from Washington. And in the beginning of his section in this book called The Maxims of Washington, he introduced it with, he went and interviewed people that had known Washington and said, what can you tell me about maybe the faith of George Washington? And every single person, and this was like John Marshall, a Supreme Court Chief Justice, but he had been the aide-de-camp for Washington during the Revolution. So these are like noted leaders at that time who had known Washington back when. And every single one of them said he was a Christian. The general was a Christian. He was devout in his faith. And all of them, they're very clear in these writings. Well, when Jared Sparks was first collecting his writings, what became the 12-volume set of the writings of Washington, he wrote the granddaughter of George Washington, Nellie Parke Custis. Now, Nellie Parke Custis had actually lived with George Washington, was like an adopted daughter, but she was really a granddaughter, but lived with George and Martha for 20 years. And Jared, after George died, Jared Sparks wrote her and said, what can you tell me about the faith of your grandpa? And she writes this incredible letter back. And genuinely, the whole letter is worth reading, where she says that, I remember every morning he would go into his study, he would lock the door, and he would be in there for an hour. And I know he would read his Bible. He had a journal out. I don't know what all he read. I don't know if there were other books he read, but I know that was his quiet time. It was his Bible study time. And she recounts, there was times that I remember him coming back and we had an aunt that was sick, and he went and laid hands on her and prayed for her that God would heal her. And she just tells all these incredible stories. But she concludes the letter by saying, sooner should we question his patriotism than question his Christianity. Now, those are the people that knew George Washington, but the modern academics today, they're like, oh, no, we're so much smarter. We're going to say he was a deist. And again, the reason I bring this up, it's possible if we read his writings that we go, you know what? I'm not sure that he had the same belief that we do in some of these areas, or like a guy like Franklin. I'm not sure that he was saved. But my point is, they're not the atheists, agnostics, and deists they're accused of being today. Right? Where John Adams, he went to a Unitarian church toward the end of his life. And the Unitarian church says there is a God, but there's only one God. And God has a spirit and God has a son, but those are subservient to God. So it's not a triune God. But John Adams believed that Jesus was a son of God. He just was not totally sure that he was equal with God. But again, that's totally different than saying he's an atheist, agnostic, or a deist. And even this notion of like the Jefferson Bible, which you mentioned, Thomas Jefferson in 1820, and anybody that wants to look that up, go look up. It's called The Life and Moral Teachings of Jesus, and look it up online. Go to like Google Images and look at the front cover, because it doesn't say the Jefferson Bible. It says A Life and Moral Teachings of Jesus, extracted textually from, I think it was the Greek, the Latin, the English, and the French. And what Jefferson did is he took all of the moral teachings of Jesus, he put them in a portfolio in 4 languages, and every night he would study it before he went to bed, because he said there's no greater moral teacher than Jesus. And I want to study those moral teachings. And he studied them in 4 languages. He even journaled about it, how he thought some translations were more accurate, maybe according to the Greek or Hebrew, than some of the others. But what's interesting is even in the front, there are pictures of Jefferson's own handwriting of all of the verses that were included. Now, the reason it matters is because the portfolio was lost in history, but those front cover pages were preserved. Now, in those front cover pages, it actually has all of the handwritten notes of the verses that Jefferson said he included in this portfolio. Now, I would challenge anybody, go read all of those verses and then come back and talk to me about what Jefferson cut out.
One could speculate, well, why would they not simply describe the founders as they were? Who cares? There shouldn't be an agenda. If you care about history, here's what this guy thought. Here's what this guy thought. Here's all the warts. Here's all the, the sin, and here's all the good things.
Right.
Because that's what we all are. We're filled with dichotomies. David's a pretty well, we always talk about David and Goliath, and we talk about the apple of the eye. And here's a guy that had a guy murdered and had sex with his wife. So, there's 2 sides to the human journey.
Absolutely.
And we have to deal with that. And it's probably part of what we grapple with even today. This is being filmed, you and I, right now in August of 2024, which in a couple months there's going to be another presidential election. Of course, Donald Trump is up for the Republican candidate, and there's this constant concern by the left saying, well, why would you Christians, support this evil, sinful man, this immoral man? Suddenly they care about morals.
Right.
And suddenly virtue matters, and being true to your wife has great value to these people if it can disparage your candidate and to try to cause you to not even want to vote for them. But what would be the point? What would be the agenda? What would be the reason that they would want to discount the Christian heritage of not only the founders, but of course, by implication, our nation?
Yeah.
If it's founded by Christians with a Christian worldview, then clearly the DNA of America is it was systemically Christian.
Yeah.
And it was systemically religious and moral. Matter of fact, the founders said, and you would always know which one it was, but I think it was Adams maybe or Madison that said, this Constitution is only for moral people. It's not going to work for anybody else. You have to believe there is a moral standard that you bow to, whether you like it or not. And if we don't do that as a republic, as the people rule, who will have a moral compass internally, it's not going to work out, because you're not going to have a bayonet at you every time you go to make a move and make sure we're not a theocracy. We're not a Marxist. So you're going to have to do the right thing because it's right individually, whether anybody's watching or not. And so clearly, what would be the fear of the understanding of us as a Christian nation? The fear would be that if people are serving God, they're not serving the state. If the people are bowing to God, then they are not going to be convinced to obey the state, the self-imposed elite. And they're always self-imposed, I've noticed. The elite, the smarter guys, choose themselves to be the smarter guys. The smarter guys always impose upon you what they expect you to behave like.
Correct.
Never given themselves the same criteria. You must get rid of petroleum products. You must eat bugs instead of meat. I will get on my private plane, eat caviar.
Well, they're the experts.
They're the experts. Right? And so the experts
they know better than us.
They should be treated with kid gloves, because they're the ones that's keeping the earth from burning up, thanks to dimming the sun, Bill Gates, or choosing to stop fossil fuels so that people in third world countries can now die, starve by heat, no air conditioning, no heat.
Yeah.
So we're going to kill all them just like they did during Corona, as long as we're saving the earth. So this pagan worship of the earth is nothing new. And it's what these guys have reverted to because they got rid of God. Well, tell me about this Freemason influence on the founding, let alone the founding fathers of this nation.
A very misrepresented thing, similar to saying, well, the founding fathers were all these atheists, agnostics, and deists. No. I mean, of the 250 founding fathers, there was a couple that might be in the deist agnostic category. Like 200 plus of them are in the strong Christian category. So it's a very different thought than what we're told today. Similar with the Masons. When we're told, well, yeah, I mean, so many of the founding fathers are Masons. And I'm like, really? Who? Explain it to me. And they're like, George Washington. I'm like, cool. Who else? And they're like, well, right. Of the 250 approximately founding fathers, there's maybe a dozen that were ever part of a Masonic lodge. Now, let me walk you through a little bit of this, because George Washington being the most famous. George Washington, during his presidency, there was a guy writing a biography about George Washington and manuscript of Washington to review, and Washington writes him a letter back. And this is one of the letters of Washington. So you actually can search in the writings of Washington for this letter. You can go to foundersarchive.gov and you can search writings of Washington, and you can find this letter, not hard to identify, where Washington writes back and says that I really appreciate the manuscript. There's one thing, however, you do need to change, and that is where you talk about me and the Masonic Lodge and me being a Grand Master and my involvement in leadership. He says, I'm not a part of any Masonic Lodge. He says, in fact, I think I've only gone maybe 2 or 3, less than half a dozen times in the last 30 years. He said, I'm certainly not involved in any kind of Masonic Lodge, and I wouldn't want people to think or remember of me that way. So please remove that from your book. That's where I'm going to start with. Now let me back up. There's a super famous painting of Washington wearing this Masonic garb, the Masonic apron. And in Virginia, there was this Masonic lodge that just in the last couple of years, they're like, we found George Washington's Masonic apron, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let me back up on that one, because that painting, I believe it was 1793 when that painting was painted. Well, in 1792, that Virginia Masonic Lodge had reached out to Washington and said, hey, we would really like to have a painting honoring you in our lodge. Can we have a painting to honor you? And Washington refused to go sit for a painting because Washington was already in the position. This is not how I want to be identified. I'm not part of that group anymore. And so Washington refused to sit for the painting. Now, there's actually a letter about this. Washington refusing to sit for the painting. The following year, the lodge found a painter who was able to do a lifelike painting, but Washington was not there for it. So Washington refuses it for a painting. They do a painting of Washington when he wasn't there. Washington, at the end of his life, says, I don't even remember for this. So then what's the real story? Well, let's back up to the French and Indian War. Before the American Revolution, we are British colonies. And at that time, over in England, they have an absolute belief in a hierarchy system where you have, right, the king, but then you have your lords and your nobles. You have your business class and then your working class. And then you have your serfs and your peasants and your slaves. Like this whole line of status. And they don't believe in this notion that all men are created equal. That's not a common thought over there. And they viewed the Americans as this really low class, hillbilly, redneck, ragtag, nothing good for. So during the French and Indian War, when Washington is part of it, he's part of it from 21 to approximately 23. Then he retires from the military because he's frustrated actually with the politics, among other things, because he wants to make the military part of his career. His older brother, Lawrence, was a really inspiration for him. And Lawrence had been out to sea and done these great things. And he wants to follow in his older brother's footsteps. And now the British are looking down on him. He's frustrated. He's given up going home. When General Braddock British general comes to America, he's told in Virginia that there's this really noted kid. A lot of people like him. If you get him to join, then you might have more support from like the Virginia militia. It would be an important political move because we want them to like us and to invite him to come back. So George Washington, 23, he's invited back, becomes a colonel. He wants to learn and grow in the military, and they don't really like him because he's an American. Well, one of the things he finds out is that the British have their own little club, their own fraternity. It's called the Masonic Lodge. And if he will join the Masonic Lodge, then instead of him being looked down on like this redneck hillbilly, he'll be a brother. And then he can connect with these officers and learn and grow from them. And so he joins during the French and Indian War. Almost every single recorded time that Washington ever went to a Masonic Lodge, it was during this time leading up until the American Revolution. From the American Revolution on, Washington's like, all right, I'm done, wash his hands. He almost never goes back to a lodge. And that's where in the letter as president, where he says, I think I've been less than half a dozen times in the last 30 years. He's like, I don't do that anymore. It's because the reason he had been going in the first place was to connect with British generals to learn their strategy. It wasn't because he was buying into the beliefs of the Masonic Lodge. Now, it's also worth noting that at that time, the Masonic Lodge did not have the same very anti-Christian beliefs they began to embrace over time. In 1815 and 1830, there were several moments when they took very direct and distinct changes in different directions that were much more anti-Christian than it was when Washington was there. And again, all of this is documented and footnoted, which we highlight in the book if people want to find out more. But then to go further, people say, but Washington, D.C., it was laid out by the Masons. Okay, hang on a second. The reason they say that is because they say, right, that the points, like the kind of the satanic, this goat head symbol, right? Like this point, that was like the Masonic layout. It was like this specific star, and it has these specific points that are on the star. What are the specific points on the star? Oh, you mean things like the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument. Okay, let me pause you there for a second. The Jefferson Memorial, where that is now, it's only where it is now because they rerouted the Potomac long after the founding fathers were dead. That used to all be underwater in a swampland. Okay. So first of all, you're telling me that they intentionally laid out DC, putting one of the main points of this Masonic symbol in the midst of a swamp where they didn't know it was ever going to be developed, number one. Then number two, you're telling me they knew that, for example, Jefferson was going to have his own memorial, that they knew that Lincoln, a guy who didn't even exist yet, that because Washington, D.C. was laid out in 1791. So Lincoln was going to have his own memorial and Washington was going to have his own memorial. Like they already like prophetically knew this was going to happen. There's no way. But what happened is people from a more modern era, they look back and they're like, oh, look at the symbol. The founding fathers must have known that. They're the ones that did that. Even if you look at the dollar bill today, people are like, well, yeah, the dollar bill, because there's the pyramid. And on top of the pyramid, there's like the all-seeing eye. No. Charles Thompson, the Secretary of Congress during the American Revolution, he's the guy that came up with the Great Seal. He's the guy that came up with the pyramid and the all-seeing eye. It's in the records of Congress, him describing why he came up with those symbols. And what he says was in the pyramid, he chose the pyramid because the pyramid was the strongest, the longest lasting structure that was known to man at that time. He said, I made it 13 levels because there was 13 colonies. He said, but I left it open on top because we don't know how many more new colonies might be added. So I left it open so we can add more. He said, and above it, I put the all-seeing eye of watchful providence, which watched over us so well during the critical stages of the revolution, et cetera, et cetera. Charles Thompson was a noted theologian. He's the one that came up with the Thompson Bible. Okay. He's a noted, outspoken Christian. And when the all-seeing eye came out at that time, when it came out, it was actually written against by Masonic Lodge. They were anti it because they said, the fact that there's an eye and a triangle, the triangle was a Trinitarian symbol. And they said, we reject the Trinity. So they actually rejected the all-seeing eye that was over the pyramid and the dollar bill at the time it came out. It wasn't until way later that they actually embraced it and said, oh, well, no, this can be like the eye that we believe there's like this God and over all, well, the supreme all-powerful being, and that's his watchful eye. It wasn't until like the 1830s or 40s that they even thought that was a good idea to accept that in their belief system. And again, all of the things I'm saying, this is all well documented. And so I would encourage anybody listening or watching that don't take my word for this. Go look this up. The problem today is that we have heard somebody tell us a story. Well, all the founding fathers were Masons, that DC was laid out in this Masonic symbol, and the Masons are anti-Christian in many regards. The founding fathers couldn't have been Christians. And we have this undertone, and America couldn't have been founded as a Christian nation because we were all Masons. These are the accusations we hear. And yet when you ask for evidence and proof, the evidence they give you is things like, well, Washington, D.C. was laid out that way. How do we know? Like what? Well, they didn't write it down because they're a secret of society and they wouldn't want people to know. Okay, so what you're telling me is you have no proof for the claim you are making. That's what you're telling me. And then if I just applied logic to the scenario, logic shows your claim to be idiotic. There was a swamp there and they didn't know the swamp was going to move. Then why didn't they choose buildings in a different location to make this symbol they wanted to make? Right? Because they didn't know the swamp was going to be moved. They didn't know the river was going to be moved. And then they didn't know those buildings were ever going to be there again. Like if you just start looking at the evidence is not there supporting the claim. Now, it is true that George Washington was in his lifetime a Mason, but he wasn't a Mason because he accepted all the beliefs of the Masonic Lodge. Literally all available evidence points to the fact he joined the Masonic Lodge because he wanted to befriend the military commanders from the British who they had been in military warfare and conflict in Europe for decades. He wants to learn and grow from them. And again, the evidence when we separate from Great Britain and he breaks off contact, he doesn't go to Masonic meetings anymore. At these Masonic lodges, he's done with it. Why? Because what he was hoping to gain from it, he already gained. And now he's done with his involvement with the Masonic Lodge. All of the evidence doesn't support the idea that America was birthed from the Masons. It actually goes a quite different direction. But again, when we don't know the story, when we haven't done the research and someone tells us a good or convincing story, we're like, well, this must be true because look how many people are saying it, right? Well, just because it's been said a lot, or even by the way, by an intelligent person, because also I don't mean to belittle. There's probably some people that have believed this. I don't mean to be belittling, because there can be really good-hearted people that have gotten bad information, and in good intentions, they've just repeated bad information.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be critical of people that have repeated what they've learned, because again, good-hearted people can have gotten bad information from good-hearted people.
That's right.
But if you get bad information, it will lead you to draw wrong conclusions, which leads you in an incorrect direction. And that's what's happened a lot. Now, I also acknowledge that most of the bad information today, it's not coming from good-hearted people, right? Like if you turn on the news, these are not good-hearted people that are just mistaken in their ideas. No, they're being pretty intentional about promoting false narratives, because they're trying to accomplish an end and a purpose. And so they're trying to promote propaganda that helps them accomplish what they're wanting to accomplish. But in some of these scenarios, there's just good-hearted people with bad information. I'm saying this, right, because maybe somebody's parents told them this. Maybe, right, you had this really awesome history teacher in high school that told you this, and they were such a good person.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting they're bad people because they've given you bad information, but I am suggesting it is very bad information that's not historically documented.
Challenges. It's so frustrating. All I care about is the truth. I honestly don't care what the answer is, if it's true, because
Right.
I'm a Christ follower. I am beholden to the truth. My faith says that Jesus Christ is the truth, not
Yes.
a truth, not my truth, the truth from which truth derives, immutable truth, transcendent truth, unchangeable truth, the actual essence of truth. Anything that is a lie is satanic, is demonic.
Right.
We are told that Satan is the father of lies. So our battle has always been, we always think it's Democrats and Republicans and atheists and Christians, and no, it's truth and lies. This story continues to be told for thousands of years.
Yes.
Baal worship and trying to build a tower to God, and we will be gods. It's the oldest story there ever
Right.
was, and it's just repeating itself in more sophisticated terms. You can't trust the internet. You go and
No.
you get this very articulate, allegedly sophisticated research and history about a particular subject, and you go, oh, that must be true, because you assume people are giving you actual information, that they don't have an agenda. They're not trying to, well, that's what propaganda is.
Right.
Is to make something seem plausible so you'll believe it, so they can begin to control you. United States of America was built on slavery. We even have a 1619 project to prove it. But here's what I wanted to be more focused, because it's such a deep subject, and there's so many nuances to it. It's not a simple one to unpack.
Right.
We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, I got a flash for you, Tim Barton. I don't know if you know this or not, but when they were talking about men, they weren't talking about black men. They weren't talking about African men. They weren't talking about women. They were talking about white European men. That's what they meant. They did not mean men. I don't know if you know this or not, but they actually thought that black men were only worth 2/3. Is it
3/5?
3/5. 3/5. They're only worth 3/5 of white men. So that's how they thought about these people. And they certainly had slaves, and they loved it. They loved hanging on to them slaves, and that's how America was built. So I don't know how you're going to possibly overcome that, but the very declaration that launched this freest nation on earth stated that all men are created equal, but they did not mean all men in the world, only white men in the colonies. Agree or disagree?
Oh, yeah, totally disagree. If people would go back and read the original draft of the Declaration, Jefferson is the primary author of the original draft of the Declaration. It's 4 pages. On the first page, at the second paragraph is where you find the phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and on it goes. The second page, he starts listing all the grievances. Third page, listing more grievances. Fourth page is where he finally wraps up that political philosophy that they mutually pledge to each other their lives, fortune, sacred honors. And that's how it concludes. When it went before the Congress, John Hancock was the president of Congress. He said, we're only going to include in this declaration what's unanimously agreed to by the body, because if we put things in here we disagree to, the king might be able to come in and pull us apart by our own local separate interests. So this has to be unanimous. There was 24 grievances in the original draft. The last grievance is on the third page. And I'm saying this because you can go online today, look for the original draft of the Declaration, go to like Google Images. You can even go to Library of Congress. You can go to National Archives. You can pull up high-res images of the original draft because they have it. On the third page, the last grievance, it's nearly half of the page. The grievance was a grievance against the slave trade, arguing against slavery and arguing for the humanity of those enslaved. And part of what it says is that the King of Great Britain has enslaved these men, and the word men is fully capitalized. Now, it's also significant that it's printed and fully capitalized because the entire declaration is in cursive. There's only one word in the declaration that is printed and fully capitalized. That's the word men. Now, the title, United States of America, that was printed and fully capitalized. But then the word men in that last grievance on the third page, where he's talking about the Africans that have been enslaved, taken from their continent across the seas to a new continent where many of them had died in transportation. And he goes, he explains the whole thing. It's massive. It's like half of the page in this grievance. But as he unfolds it, he calls them men. Now, again, why that matters, because he already clarified the second paragraph that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He included the African slaves who were involved in the slave trade and said, this should not be happening. Now, again, part of why this matters, John Hancock said they're only going to include in the final draft what's unanimously agreed to. And there were two colonies that opposed that grievance. Georgia and South Carolina said, to this point, we haven't tried to, in the slave trade, we haven't tried to end slavery in our colonies, so we don't have that grievance. Well, why was that a grievance in the first place? In the grievance, Jefferson identified that every time we've passed laws in our colonies to try to stop the slave trade, to try to stop slavery, the king has vetoed those laws. And so we are motivated to get away from the king. So one of the things we can do is end the slave trade, end slavery. In those two states, Georgia, South Carolina said, you know, we really don't have that issue. We're kind of okay with the way things are right now. John Hancock removed that because it wasn't unanimous. But it's significant that 11 of the 13 colonies voted in favor of it. And to go further, when we separated from Great Britain, every single northern colony began passing laws for the abolition of slavery, not just ending the slave trade, which every northern colony and almost every southern colony ended the slave trade before you even get to the Constitution. But Georgia and South Carolina did not end the slave trade, but every northern colony then passed laws for the abolition of slavery. By, I think it was 1803 or 1804, every single northern colony had passed laws for the abolition of slavery, the last one being New Jersey to join on. Well, that's 30 years before England ended slavery in 1833, that every single northern colony in America has passed laws to abolish slavery. To go further, in 1807, Thomas Jefferson signed the very first law abolishing the slave trade on March 2nd, 1807. England didn't sign that law to abolish the slave trade till March 25th, 1807. And historians today say, well, England really, they get credit. They were the first one to abolish the slave trade. Well, in fairness, their law went into effect on March 25th, 1807. America's law didn't go into effect until January 1st of the following year, 1808. But that's because the Constitution said that no laws can be passed preventing the importation of individuals into the colony prior to the year January 1st, 1808. So we had a constitutional provision, which was a compromise made during the Constitutional Convention, where the anti-slavery founding fathers told the pro-slavery founding fathers, hey, we won't stop this for 20 years, but in 20 years, we're going to revisit this conversation. And then, right, everything's on the table. Well, Jefferson's president. He petitioned Congress in 1806, 1807, they write the law. He signs a law March 2nd, 1807, doesn't go into effect until January 1st, 1808. But England's law, even though it went into effect on March 25th, 1807, it had a provision that any ship that had any contract to be a slave trader, they had 1 year to fulfill their commitments. And at the end of that 1 year, they could have no new commitments and no more slave trading. So England's law didn't fully abolish the slave trade until March 25th, 1808. So not only did America sign that law first, America's law went into full effect first. So America is leading the way. America was the first nation in the world to have legal steps taken to abolishing the slave trade, to abolishing slavery, to federally abolish the slave trade. So not just colonies, but federally as a nation abolish slave trade. And then to go further, when we actually ended slavery for the whole nation, it was through the 13th Amendment, which was ratified December of 1865. When that happened, we were the fourth major nation in the world to end and abolish slavery as a whole. England did in 1833, then France, then Denmark. America was fourth. At that time, there was 128 nations in the world. We were number 4 of 128 nations. And that's where we lose context and perspective. If you were in a race with 128 people and you came in 4th place, nobody's like, you're the worst, you're terrible. No, We're like, you did amazing. That's so good. Also worth noting, we are the nation that in that era, we had slavery for the least amount of time of any of those nations. So we arrived, the party was already started. We arrived, all this going on. We're like, you know what? We don't really like this. We arrive late to the party. We leave the party early. We were the fourth major nation to do this. And we actually did this at the end of a war where white people fought other white people. And at the end, we freed all the black people. We're the only nation in the world that fought a war to end slavery and to give even modern day perspective. Back in 2021, when the UN was together, there was 193 nations. There was a report that came out, a study that came out, that 94 of those 193 nations that are part of the UN, 94 of those nations have still not passed laws to abolish slavery in their nations. So slavery is legal all over the world. Now, this is context because America started legal opposition to slavery before any other nation in the world. America had the first major region in the world, the New England colonies, to abolish slavery before anywhere else. America signs the very first anti-slave trade law federally in the world for the first nation to ban the slave trade. And then America becomes the fourth nation to ban slavery. And we're the only nation to do it at the end of fighting a war to actually free the slaves. America has one of the most impressive anti-slavery records in the history of the world. It's just we don't tell the whole story and we don't take it in context.
And take over America and control it. I mean, there's no other reason than to take power of the greatest nation that's ever existed in human history as far as egalitarianism. Oddly enough, those who believe in equity, everybody gets the same thing. Of course, we don't believe that as Americans. We believe in equality. You certainly should have access to the same opportunities, and then whatever happens, it's meritocracy.
It's equal opportunity, not equal outcome.
That's exactly it. But I believe of all the rights, the First Amendment rights they give us, the free speech rights, that the religious liberties is actually the most important one you can have because it's your conscience.
Yeah.
It's your conscience. It's how you believe you want to live your life philosophically. So that's a pretty deep, important thing. When it comes to protesting, or if it comes to propagandizing the press, or if it comes to telling your government, what for, that's more existential involvement, practical involvement in things. And it's important. But my religion is my soul. It's how I think. It's how I see. It's transcendent. It's the greatest good because it gives me my agency as a human. It's my freedom that God gives me. If I'm not mistaken, and again, I let you be the expert, what it has been recreated to mean was that the religion needs to keep its nose out of the government. Now, Jesus is God Day. You can do it. You just can't mandate it by law. Am I wrong?
You're generally right. I would add a little context and thought to that because the idea, which you were correct, we were trying to be different than what was happening in Europe, where Europe, everybody had a state-established religion. England, because of King Henry VIII, they were Anglican. But over in Germany, because of Martin Luther, they were all Lutherans. And in France and Italy, they were Catholic. And so you had these different state-established religions that you had to follow. So when the founding fathers said that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, they're not referring to Christianity in general. They're referring to denominations specific. So they can't say we're all going to be Baptist, we're all going to be Presbyterian, we're all going to be Assembly of God, or whatever it is. They couldn't pick a denomination and say you all have to be Congregationalist or Anglican Episcopalian. They said, no, Congress isn't going to do that. But the reason that matters is because there are laws that Congress has passed about reading the Bible or praying. But the reason it was different is because it wasn't saying you have to believe certain doctrinal beliefs. It was saying that the premises even of the Declaration that we believe there's a divine creator. The divine creator gave us rights. Government exists to protect those rights. They believed without religion and morality, our nation would never exist. And also Benjamin Rush, one of the founding fathers, wrote about in education, there's no useful education in a republic except to be relayed in religion. This found in the Bible, the word of God. And so the founding fathers advocated, openly advocated for the Bible in schools. Now, where this is a little caveat, the U.S. Congress never passed a law saying the Bible has to be in schools. But also, they never would have because they believed in federalism and the 10th Amendment. And education doesn't belong to the federal government. It belonged to the states. So Congress never would do that. But for example, if you back up after 9/11 in 2001, when Congress passed a law where they said that the president every year on the anniversary will do an official prayer proclamation calling on the nation to pray. And that's where some people would say, oh, they're trying to establish a religion. Well, no. It didn't say that we're all going to be Anglican, we're all going to be Episcopalian, we're all going to be Baptist or Presbyterian or Methodist or whatever. They believed in a very general idea, almost like what C.S. Lewis would have called the mere Christianity, right? Like the things that all of us, we have different doctrinal beliefs, but there's some basic ideas we come together on. We know, all of us know there's a God. And this is not establishing a denomination in their sense of establishing a religion. We know there's a God. So the idea of praying to God, that's not far-fetched. Now, the reason that even understanding some of this context matters is because the founding fathers believed in a separation of institutions, not a secularization of institutions, right? That the government has a different role than the church. And so when you have a state-established church, that is the government mandating that you follow certain beliefs and doctrines from the church, that those are different institutions. And we never want a religious leader to come over and tell us in the government, we have to pray to God a certain way and use certain prayers and have certain doctrines. I said, no, those are separate, but they never believed in secular institutions, which is why every single founding father that became governor, they issued prayer proclamations as governor calling on their state to pray. But what they would say is that each should assemble in their own respective congregations, meaning that it's your own different belief system, but on this day, we should all pray. Today, people say, well, that's a violation of separation of church and state. You've misunderstood what that means. They believe the government shouldn't control your doctrines, your beliefs, but the idea of the government encouraging you to have faith and belief, the founding fathers thought they totally should, because without religion and morality, George Washington's farewell address, he said, religion and morality are the indispensable supports in referencing our political prosperity. He said, our nation will not succeed without religion and morality. And then you reference a letter in 1778 that John Adams wrote to the militia in Massachusetts, where, and the whole letter is great. He said, without religion, if we're trying to control the moral behavior of the people without religion, it'd be like trying to catch a whale in a small fishing net. That whale is going to rip through the net. It's never going to work. He said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Our government only works with religion and morality. And so the founding fathers encouraged religion and morality all the time. But to your point, no, Congress has never passed a law mandating specific religious practices or beliefs. They've never mandated that you have to wear a cross necklace, that you have to have a nativity scene, that you, no, that's not it at all. But were there days that they said, hey, we encourage everybody, not mandate, we encourage everybody on this day, take time and pray today. We encourage, and by the way, even in schools, they would say every school day, we're going to open with reading the Bible in schools. Now reading the Bible in schools, today, people say, well, that's establishing a religion only because we think of religion as Christianity and Buddhist and Muslim and Hindu. But back then, that's not the way they thought of it. They thought of religions as the Anglicans were a religion, and the Baptists were a religion, and the Congregationalists were a religion. And what we view today as denominations of Christianity, they actually called those religions, and they said, we're not going to favor one religion, but they absolutely favored Christianity. Now, I know what I'm saying is a hot take. And a lot of people are like, I'm not sure about that. Good. Don't trust me. I'm genuinely, don't believe me. Go back and look up. By 1815, there had been more than 1,400 official government prayer proclamations from the New England states alone, calling on their nation at times of prayer and fasting or prayer and thanksgiving. But this is from governors, by the way, that included presidents like George Washington and John Adams. Even James Madison, father of the Constitution, had prayer proclamations as president. It included everybody who was governor, like a John Hancock, a Sam Adams, a Thomas Jefferson as governor of Virginia. They did prayer proclamations as governor. They didn't believe in a separation of church and state the way we're viewing it today, because they believed that the government, the idea of government came from God. God made three institutions. God made the family, the church, and the government. And a lot of times as Christians, we accept and embrace, well, yeah, I mean, God should be part of our family, and we definitely want God in the church. But God also made the government. A lot of Christians are like, but yeah, I mean, we don't want religion and government because separation of church and state. Christians buy into this notion. That's not a biblical notion. I mean, where did Moses, the guy who gave us all of the law, when Israel leaves Egypt, they become their own nation. God gave Moses all of the law for the nations of Israel. God gave them their government structure. Well, where did Moses come up with all those ideas? From God. God is the one who showed the proper role of government, the function of government, how government should treat people and boundaries. And like that all came from God. So the idea as a Christian that we would say, oh, we don't really need God and government. You have absolutely misunderstood, misread, or not read your Bible if you are coming to that conclusion, because God wants to be part of everything he made. And God gives directives for success in everything that he created. And so if God's given us the idea of how to be successful in marriages and in families and how to have a church that does what God wants it to do we think God didn't give ideas for the way government should function? Well, God definitely should be part of that conversation in our understanding, because if we do it God's ways always work. And if you don't do it God's ways, it's never going to work. This is what the reality we're living with right now. And so instead of even Christians saying, oh no, we shouldn't have religion, separate church and state, I think you've misunderstood. Yeah. Where did government come from? Who originated government? Well, for example, you had a vehicle and you're like, hey, what's the proper function of my vehicle? You pull out the owner's manual and you're like, well, let's see what it says. God created government and God wrote an owner's manual. It's called the Bible. And the Bible absolutely gives directions and an instruction for government and even government leaders. What does God require of government officials? There is guidance in the Bible, but today, far too often, not only do we not know the history of the origins of the phrase separate church state, which, as you mentioned, Jefferson's the one that wrote that. It was Jefferson received in a letter in October of 1801. He responded with a letter. I think it was January 1st of 1802 is when he wrote the letter to the Danbury Baptist. But what is worth noting, and again, that whole letter's online. It's worth reading. It's not what most people think it says today. But Jefferson wrote that letter on a Friday. 2 days later on Sunday, Jefferson attended church in the U.S. Capitol building, where the largest church in Washington, D.C. was in the Capitol. And as that church grew, it became the largest Protestant church in the nation up through the Civil War. It was in the Capitol building. Now, Jefferson as president was attending church in the U.S. Capitol. If Jefferson's the guy that wrote the phrase separation church and state, and Jefferson did prayer proclamations as governor, and Jefferson's attending church in the Capitol, which, by the way, that Sunday, the pastor John Leland was a pastor who was there, who was a good friend with Jefferson. Jefferson actually invited him to preach in the U.S. Capitol. If Jefferson had meant what we think that phrase means, that you can't have religion in government, then why did Jefferson go to church at the U.S. Capitol and hear from his friend, the preacher John Leland, who he had invited that Sunday? Why did that happen? Or maybe that phrase doesn't mean what we think it means, and it's been distorted. And really, I mean, we track historically where the U.S. Supreme Court, back in 1947, it was a case, Everson versus Board of Education. The first time the U.S. Supreme Court cited the phrase separate church state from the letter without reading the whole letter. And the Supreme Court said, we've always applied that to the free exercise clause. We really should be applying it to the establishment clause, meaning that we've always used this to say the government has to protect people's free exercise of religion. But maybe we should be saying that we need to make sure people aren't trying to establish religion in America. And that's what happened when they used it, for example, in 1962, in the case Engel versus Vitale, when they said, you can't pray in schools anymore. They said, well, that's because people are trying to establish religion in schools, and the government needs to make sure that we don't establish religion in schools because we need to keep that separation church and state. And so they used it as a weapon to stop religious activity, which also is completely flipping on its head the idea. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. Children praying in school is not Congress making a law, right? The idea that kids can't pray at their own graduation. Well, a valedictorian praying at their graduation is not Congress making a law. And again, go through this. Kids reading the Bible in school is not Congress making a law. But they said, well, we need to stop religious activity because those kids are trying to establish a religion. No, that's not what they're doing. But we begin to have a very secular, anti-religious court that wanted to stop religious activity. And they used this phrase from Jefferson as their tool, as their weapon. And they divorced that phrase from the context of the letter, where they stopped quoting the letter. Because if you actually read the letter, you'd realize that's not what Jefferson's actually saying. Go read the letter. Jefferson says that your religious liberties will never be threatened by the federal government, because the reason they wrote the First Amendment was to put up a wall of separation of church and state to protect you from the federal government infringing on your religious activity. Well, that's not the way we view that today. Today, we view it as the government's supposed to stop your religious activity in public because you're trying to establish your religion. That's totally inaccurate. And by the way, in the last couple of Supreme Court decisions, last couple of summers in 2022, like the Coach Kennedy decision, the football coach from Bremerton, Washington, who was fired for praying on the 50-yard line at the end of a football game by himself. When the Supreme Court heard that decision, it took 7 years to get to the Supreme Court. When they heard the decision, they not only restored him, said he was wrongfully terminated, but they said all this previous standard we've been using for like the last 50 or 60 years that's been ruling against religion, that has absolutely been incorrect interpretation that people have been making up, not based on the Constitution, not based on historic precedent. And so we're removing all of those tests that they were using to say no more religious activity. So all of the things we were told we couldn't do for a long time, that's all now back on the table, because the only things that were being used to tell us we couldn't do that anymore, those have now been removed. So we can once again have the same kind of religious freedom in public and even in schools that we used to have. But the reason it was argued against forever, and the reason even today, there are some Christians who are like, no, we don't want religion in government. It's a very foolish idea, because every nation will be governed by some standard of morality. And so the question is, well, what standard or whose standard of morality are we going to use? Well, the founding fathers thought there's no better standard than the Bible, than Jesus' standard. Well, if you say no Bible and no Jesus, then whose standard are we going to use to govern our nation? And that's where, as Christians, not only should that be a terrifying thought to imagine what we might come up with, but that's where it should be obvious. Yeah, we really probably should use the Bible and follow God's standard, because that's the best standard for people to function well with each other and to live free in civilized society.
If you read the Constitution, it's not really complicated. I mean, they made it fairly simple and direct. I mean, kind of. I mean, obviously, there's elements of it that I guess could be misunderstood or aren't as quite as, in retrospect, not quite as precise as you wish it had been. In the Second Amendment has a couple of those phrases that could make it a little less pristine than maybe nowadays we would hope it had been, so that we don't have such confusion. But there's a couple things about this, and I'm a layman, not like you, that is an expert. This is your bailiwick. This is your expertise. The Constitution, the United States' history, Christian heritage, and whatnot. But if I was just as an American citizen, layman, just a comedian, I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm doing. Just in a general observation, what seems to be flawed in that ruling was, first off, they were saying you're establishing a religion, and yet even under that premise, the only way you can establish religion unconstitutionally is if Congress made a law. That's what it seems to be telling me. So if the Congress had nothing to do with it, it was a community standard, that you can do whatever you want.
Right. Yes.
That's what we're doing. That's what a state right is. And that's why, back full circle, Anti-Federalist was, this is where we want the federal government to get out of our business, because in our community, we want it like this. If you don't want it down the road, so be it. That's what the Roe v. Wade redecision of eliminating that as a bad decision was about. It didn't eliminate abortion. It simply said, you as a state decide what your people want, but it's none of our business. So that was a big deal. And so that first premise, that it's the Establishment Clause, is completely erroneous based on what the clear reading seems to be. Two, it seems to me that this is because they took it from a letter from Jefferson. It's not in the Constitution.
No, it's not.
Well, how did you give this such gravitas, such weight, such power, when it's not even in the Constitution? It's some guy writing to another guy, and yet somehow you gave it some incredible weight. And because it was Jefferson, somehow he gets to decide for the rest of us what the Establishment Clause meant because of this letter. And as you said, it's out of context anyways. It's completely backwards from what he actually stated. But again, they chose this from a document that has no precedent.
No.
For having some kind of weight. And if I'm not mistaken, I'd read, and I just blanked on his name, but the Supreme Court justice at that time, who I believe made the decision, was a former Ku Klux Klan member who hated Catholics. And he ruled that to have a tax-paid voucher for Catholic kids to go to school on the bus, I don't like that. I don't want Catholics to have that. So that's where he tried to go find, and this is what we call judicial activism, a reason to
Yeah.
be anti-Catholic. Now, maybe I'm mistaken. I've read this. Now, maybe you have a different version of that. But my understanding was this was one guy's animus, a former Ku Klux Klan head leader who had an animus against Catholics. And so for him, his personal bias caused him to make this ruling that has been so destructive to America, to not only, if you want to just say, from a spiritual dimension, you eliminated our ability to be honorable to God. There's a consequence for that if you're a spiritual person. If you're not, there's still a consequence for stripping away some freedom I had as an American to do what I wanted in a public sphere, which is to me equally tragic and broken and dangerous, because any freedom stolen from me ain't going to be given back. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to either get a constitutional amendment or you're going to have to fight in a war for it. And that's what we've become to. And that's where we're going to end this, actually, because I do have subscribers of the Mighty 10,000 who believe in being disciples for Christ. It's a $3 a month donation, and you get my comedy on breadsign.com. You get my email newsletters, but you also get a special bonus question from my guests that only you get to do. And this is a volatile one, so maybe it belongs behind the special wall where you're going to have to go get it. But it's this. Do all the years I've done comedy, and I'm a conservative Christian guy, so I get all the conservative Christians who love my comedy to appreciate it. And oftentimes, Tim, it's my biggest fan base is in the Midwest, in the South, who are more conservative. And one of the easy go-tos, it's like doing a Christian event and saying, Jesus, and everybody cheers. It's an easy way to get the crowd cheer. You just say something. One easy way for me to get the crowd cheering was to say, well, yeah, they can say that and that, but don't forget, we still got that Second Amendment. Whoa! Like suddenly we're all like, I'll say, yeah, man, we are all packing, baby. And it's an easy go-to. Well, the Second Amendment not only gave us the right as citizens to own a weapon, to be able to have a weapon, but it did something far more dangerous. And I think as we, again, record in August of 2024, and we're watching riots happening in the UK and other parts of the West that are basically just being destroyed, the one thing that's for sure is these people that are trying to defend their nation's heritage, they can't.
Right.
They don't have any weapons. So that was a reason the founders wanted us to have weapons. And it wasn't so we could hunt, even though we need weapons to hunt. And it wasn't so that we could do target practice, even though that's fun. It was a militia.
Yes.
They said every American citizen should know how to handle a weapon, because if, God forbid, your government becomes despotic and decides to weaponize the institutions and or the military against its own citizens in an unconstitutional way, to force its perspective upon you, you have to be able to defend yourself. We know that because as we write this, we just did that to Britain. We just did this. So we know why it's crucial that we're able to be armed. We have a civil war where Americans fought against each other and died more casualties than any other war we've ever been in, because everybody that died was an American. Nobody wants a civil war.
No.
Nobody wants to shoot fellow Americans. Nobody wants somebody invading my house. I don't want the FBI showing up at my door because I happen to believe in freedom and free speech. And I don't want somebody to go shoot at a Democrat because I feel like they've chosen the crazy anti-American, forbidding me to be free point of view, even though that's exactly what they have chosen, is this sort of anarchy and this sort of Marxist foundational point of view that is destructive to America. But nevertheless, they live in a free nation still for a little bit that gives them the freedom to postulate that idea in the hopes that Americans will say, no, thank you. So here's the question. One of the reasons that Lincoln wouldn't allow the South to secede is he felt it was unconstitutional, I guess. And so he felt we have to fight not just for freedom, but I want the Union to remain. So I'm not going to let you go. So A, is a Civil War constitutional? And B, and most importantly, how do we decide if they ever got to a place that we feel like we have no choice? that we have to defend ourselves against our government, how would we even know when that day was?
Yeah.
How would we know how that day is as Christians, as Americans who do not want this, who do not want this bloody, do not want to pick up arms? And yet, that's what the second was given to us for.
Yeah.
For such a time as that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would that look like? Because once you go down there, there's no back. Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own interview. If you want the answer that you haven't heard yet, go to bradstine.com and join one of the 3 tiers. It is the militia of the mind, it is the warrior level, or it is the special forces. And then you'll get all kinds of special content and bonus answers to make you smarter than you could ever imagine. Go there now, jump on and join the Mighty 10,000. And very shortly, we'll find out who the next president might be, even if Trump wins. And most of us who are conservative and Christian believe that he's representing the most moral and hopefully constitutional means of government and system in our country and restoring that. Hopefully, he's not our answer. He's not our savior. I do not worship the United States. I worship God, but I'm grateful for it, and I'm going to fight for it. It's my territory. I was given this. God would hold me responsible for it. But I love how you kind of concluded it by saying you got to get involved, you got to do things, and it's going to be hard. And we've been lazy too long. You have to actually be proactive for us to have an opportunity for this nation to remain. And God only knows if it will, but it's up to the church, I believe, to repent and to get on their knees and to believe that God will restore. And hopefully a third great awakening perhaps is our only chance. In the meantime, do what we can. Thank you, Tim Barton and WallBuilders. Guys, go to wallbuilders.com. You need to see what type of things, as the militia of the mind, people that are part of what I believe are proactive, fighting for our freedoms and religious liberties. To me, WallBuilders are part of the militia of the mind. They're giving you information. They're telling you what really was true about the Constitution, what really is true about your religious liberties, your freedoms, your First Amendment rights, your Second Amendment rights. What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to have a sovereign border? It's just simply what it is necessary for our government to function and not be in disarray. And that's kind of where we're at now. So thank you for your guys' hard work, for your dad forming and starting WallBuilders, and for you taking the reins and running forth with such incredible insight and wisdom, Tim. And I'm grateful that you're fighting this fight for us as a believer, as an American. And, let's see what happens, but let's go down swinging. And so, again, folks, go to wallbuilders.com for information. We'll certainly have you back on. Folks, remember, you are the republic, you are the people, and we're still hanging on. So if anybody ever says you're politically incorrect, I always say thank you for the compliment. The last thing you want to be is being rewarded for being a Marxist. And political correctness is cultural Marxism, folks. I'm just a comedian, but I'm also an American and a Christian. And so I unapologetically stand for these values that we talked about for such a great length of time today. And I hope you were inspired by it. I hope it makes you go out and live it. Be unapologetic about being a faith believer and as being an American. And remember, I'm just a comic, but I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, which is what? I'm just putting the woke back to sleep. Thanks, Tim. See you next Monday.